Fawn is an orphan nobody hell-bent on making a name for himself with the help of his pet whale. He has spent countless years clawing his way to the top, but just when his dream is about to come true, he is killed by his own pet and reborn as a penniless, ugly loser. When Fawn opens his eyes, he finds himself in the middle of the forest, and miraculously he is still in one piece, although his clothes are different for some reason. He checks himself to see if he is still bonded with his whale, Nian, but sadly, it looks like his pet is gone for good. For now, he needs to figure out where he is and think of a way to get home, so he stumbles down to a nearby river to get a drink of water. However, when he sees his reflection in the water, he realizes that his face is way uglier than it used to be. He starts panicking and tries to figure out what could have caused this, but all the commotion draws attention to him, and eventually, a group of armed soldiers track him down. Fawn is confused and wonders why soldiers showed up all of a sudden, but before he could even say a word, they all draw their swords on him and take him into custody. Before all this, Fawn used to be the leader of the fast-growing Lianxiao Pavilion sect, and his only dream in life was to raise his sect to A class in the league rankings, and he was really close to achieving that dream. All he needed to do was win his next match in the sect tournament to prove himself. On the day of the tournament, as Fawn was leaving for the tournament, he was greeted by all his sect members, and they all wished him luck in his upcoming battle. Fawn thanked them for their support, but he needed to hurry so he wouldn't be late for his match. The A-Class promotion tournament is a big deal on this continent, so there are many influential people here who are against the idea of an unknown sect like Fawn's being allowed to participate. However, there are also people who are in favor of his participation, like the master of the Bai family. He knows that Fawn was originally born into a very reputable family that tragically met its end years ago, leaving Fawn as the only survivor. Yet despite this setback, Fawn was able to build a new sect from the ground up, and in just a few short years, his Lianxiao Pavilion has already risen to B class. Such rapid growth is almost unheard of, but the reason Fawn is so strong is because he has a deep and profound understanding of the spiritual pets that exist in this world. Soon the tournament begins, so Fawn steps out into the arena, and with a wave of his hand, he summons his giant whale pet, Nian. His opponent is impressed by Fawn's display because it is clear that he has put a lot of work into cultivating his pet, but he isn't the only one with an impressive pet. Master Hong clasps his hands to form a ball of fire, and from that fire, he summons his giant ape pet so he can compete on equal ground with Fawn. He is eager to see what Fawn can do, so as the match begins, both pets charge at each other and clash in the middle of the ring. The ape delivers a devastating uppercut to Nian, but Nian quickly recovers and retaliates with a high-pressure water blast. Fawn then instructs Nian to attack Hong directly, so Hong is forced to run and dodge until the ape grabs Nian by the mouth and starts swinging it around the stadium. The organizers really should have invested in a barrier or something because the wind from Nian's tail alone is causing a lot of trouble for the spectators, and when the ape throws the whale, it totally would have squished all those people if Fawn hadn't regained control in time. He then flies into the air with Nian and prepares to use one of his special moves, but Hong was expecting it, so as Nian water attacks, Hong and his ape are able to block and evade with ease. The ape then flies into the sky, and it must have filled its ultimate bar or something because it unlocks a new form and throws a fire fist straight at Fawn and Nian. Some of Fawn's supporters are starting to get worried because that giant fist looks pretty intimidating, but Fawn isn't worried. He came into this fight fully aware of how skilled Hong is, however he's still confident that he can win because he has a special trick up his sleeve. He performs a technique to ascend his whale to its second form, and as the fire fist approaches, Nian swallows a whole. The ape keeps attacking, but with Fawn's skill, Nian is able to swallow the energy of all the attacks until it finally spits it back at the ape. But just when it looked like Fawn was about to win, something strange began happening to Nian. Its body began to decay right before Fawn's eyes, and it suddenly started rampaging through the stadium. Fawn has no idea what's going on, but he can't let Nian hurt innocent people, so he tries to cancel his summon. But for some reason it isn't working, and as soon as Nian realizes that Fawn is trying to unsummon it, it turned towards around and swallowed Fawn whole. Back to the present, Fawn ended up getting locked away in a dungeon, but on his way here, he managed to gather some useful information. It has been a year since the incident at the sect tournament, so the whole world believes that Fawn lost his life to his own pet. And technically speaking, they are right. Fawn indeed died that day, but before the tournament, he received a forbidden scroll from a mysterious masked man. The man informed him that this is a reincarnation scroll, and if Fawn were to suffer a fatal injury while in possession of this scroll, then a year later, the scroll will transport his soul into the body of a healthy person who recently died. That means the previous owner of this body died in that forest, at which point Fawn's soul took over, but Fawn still has no idea who the original owner of this body was, or what crime he committed to make him a wanted man. Fawn is also curious about the circumstances that led to his death because his whale had never disobeyed him before, so someone must have sabotaged him. Either way, he's going to need to get out of here if he wants to gather more information, so he tries summoning the spiritual pets of this body to see if they can help. However, all he gets is a poodle and a cactus. This isn't looking good for him, but he wants to remain optimistic, so he asks them to show him their special abilities. However, much to Fawn's disappointment, the only special move the poodle knows is how to piss on the floor. As for the cactus, it can create long vines which it can then use to restrain people, and thankfully this ability seems somewhat useful, but there's no way he can escape like this. A few moments later, Fawn hears a guard approaching, so he tells the pets to return to his body before they get caught. The guard opens the cell door and tells Fawn that Miss Bai wants to see him in her chambers, but as soon as the guard sets foot in the cell, he is revolted by the stench of the poodle piss on the ground. Fawn tries to cover it up and says he was the one who pissed on the floor, but considering the distance, the guard finds that hard to believe. However, it's not the guard's job to worry about where Fawn pisses, so he tells him to just hurry up because Bai is waiting for him. Along the way, Fawn tries asking the guard why this bad lady wants to see him because considering how he was arrested, he is worried that he might get tortured, but the guard doesn't answer any of his questions. They eventually arrive at Bai's room, so the guard knocks on the door and tells her that he has brought the prisoner as she requested. Bai is pleased, so she tells the guard to leave Fawn here and return to his duties, but while the guard wasn't paying attention, Fawn managed to untie his hands. Although his chances of escaping still aren't great, so he pretends that he is still restrained. He then walks into Bai's room and finds her waiting for him while she drinks a cup of tea. She calls him Liu Fengmeng, which is the name of the original owner of this body, and asks him if he knows why she chose to keep him alive. Fawn has no idea what Liu did to make someone like Bai mad, so he tries playing it safe and asks if she's going to give him a second chance to make up for his mistakes. However, the mistake in question is the fact that Liu grabbed Bai's melons in front of all the members of her sect. Fawn had nothing to do with that, but Bai doesn't know he reincarnated into Liu's body, and even if he told her, she probably wouldn't believe him anyway, so he tries apologizing to see if she will forgive him. However, Bai has no intention of forgiving him. She tells him that the only reason he isn't dead already is because she wants to make him suffer the same humiliation she felt, so she plans to make Fawn her slave and mess with him for the rest of his life. Fawn really doesn't like the sound of that, so he starts slowly backing away from Bai while trying to convince her that he would be a terrible slave. He eventually makes it to the door and he thinks he might actually be able to get away, but just as he is about to leave, Bai says she never gave him permission to go outside, so as punishment, she attacks him with her spiritual pet. Fawn manages to block the initial attack, but then Bai sends her snake out to attack him in its true form. Bai is disappointed that Fawn died so quickly because she thinks there's no way he could have survived, but it turns out that Fawn is still in one piece, and he has brought out his pets so he can fight back. Although the sight of such weak-looking pets makes her laugh, she can't believe Fawn really thinks a pet like that can stand up to her snake, so she intends to prove her superiority and orders the snake to attack. Fawn needs to do something too, so he orders the poodle Juan to charge forward. At first it looks like Juan is doomed to become snake food, but then Fawn takes control of Juan's movements and all of a sudden he's breaking ankles left and right. Bai can't believe that a poodle is actually outrunning her snake, but Fawn has even more tricks up his sleeve. The cactus is in position, so Fawn gives the order for it to catapult itself at Bai's snake, while Juan has it distracted. The cactus launches itself right into the side of the snake's head, and now both Juan and the cactus are running around and confusing the snake. Bai is amazed that Fawn is capable of controlling two pets at the same time with such skill, but she still has a plan in mind. She tells her snake to spin around really fast to knock Juan and the cactus away, and once the snake is free from the cactus's vines, it follows it through the air and eats it. Bai celebrates because she thinks she has won, but this was actually all part of Fawn's plan, so he takes control of the cactus, and from inside the snake's mouth, he ties the snake up. And for some reason, the snake is enjoying it. Now that the snake has been restrained, Fawn tells Juan to use his ultimate move, so Juan runs up the snake's body and pisses all over the snake and Bai. Bai can't believe Fawn just did that, and she is so enraged that she activates her snake's second phase just to get her revenge. All of a sudden, Bai's snake engulfs itself in fire to burn the vines, and the cactus is nearly scorched to death as a result. The snake then swats Juan away, and he's down for the count, so Fawn recalls both of them to make sure they don't die. And now that Fawn's pets are out of the way, Bai decides to target Fawn as well, so her snake lunges forward, knocking him into the water. Fawn is on the verge of drowning, and he's starting to worry that he might die here. But then he notices something swim past his face, and it gives him a good idea. Back on the surface, Bai is using some of the pond water to wash the dog piss off her shoes when suddenly Fawn pops out of the water. She is surprised because she thought he would have drowned by now, but it looks like Fawn bonded with a catfish in the pond and made it one of his pets. Bai mocks him for being so desperate because everyone knows a catfish is an unreliable pet. Sure, it can be cultivated into a near-invincible whale, but after one of the whales went rogue and killed its master, its species was given the title of Master Killer. Fawn tries to tell her it wasn't the whale's fault and that someone sabotaged it, but Bai has no reason to believe him. And even if she did, it's not like it would change anything because all the catfishes in the nation have been exterminated under the League's orders. The only reason there's a catfish here is because Bai's brother likes to collect pets from extinct species, and this may very well be the last catfish on the continent. Besides, the only one who knows how to bring out the true potential of the catfish is the master of the Lingxiao Pavilion, but he's long dead, so catfishes are practically useless now. Fawn refuses to listen to Bai's catfish slander any longer, so he tells her to shut up, and Bai takes offense to this, so she decides to finish him off on the spot. She sends her snake after Fawn, but Fawn is able to catch its fangs and hold it in place long enough for his new catfish to get into position. Nyan swims through the air until it is behind the snake, and on Fawn's command, it bites down on the snake's tail and begins sucking. Bai can't believe what she's seeing because the only one capable of such a technique is the deceased master of the Lingxiao Pavilion, yet Fawn's catfish manages to suck her snake until it has been completely devoured. Now, Bai is completely defenseless, and she has no means to stop Fawn from escaping anymore, so he gets out of the pond and makes a run for it. Before long, the guards from Bai's family are alerted of Fawn's escape, so some wolves are sent out after him. And if you've ever been chased by wolves, you know it's not very fun. Fawn has managed to evade capture so far, but he won't last much longer, so as he approaches the edge of the mountain, he comes up with a daring idea. He's going to jump. He knows there's no way the guards will be crazy enough to jump after him, but he still needs to think of a way to survive the fall, so he summons Cactus and uses its vines to grab onto the peak of one of the rock formations. He then uses his momentum to swing himself all the way up onto the next mountain, and with the distance between them, the guards stand no chance of catching Fawn now. The guards spend the entire night looking for Fawn, but they can't find him, so the next morning they return to Bai's compound to tell her the bad news. They couldn't find so much as a footprint anywhere on the mountain, so they believe Fawn might have fallen to his death at some point. However, Bai doesn't seem so convinced. Fawn completely disgraced her, so there's no way she can just accept that he died in the mountains. She yells at her guards for being unreliable and demands that they go out and keep looking for Fawn because she wants him dead or alive. Just then, Bai's brother arrives because he heard news of the incident that happened here, so he asks Bai to tell him the name of the man who caused all this trouble. Meanwhile, Fawn wakes up to a bird standing on his face and he is perfectly fine, but he was really hoping that everything that happened last night would turn out to be a dream. Back at Bai's house, she has just finished telling her brother everything that Fawn did to her, including the fact that he used a catfish to devour her snake. She pleads with her brother to avenge her, but Bai's brother couldn't care less about her petty grudge against Fawn. He is much more upset at the fact that Fawn stole the limited edition catfish that he got for his rare species collection. Bai gets mad that her brother isn't taking her seriously, and she is upset that he didn't offer her the catfish when it's so strong. However, Bai's brother tells her the catfish species isn't particularly strong. In fact, there's nothing special about it aside from the innate ability to devour things, but it only works on targets that are idle for a certain amount of time. Even when it evolved into a whale, it isn't especially powerful, so by all metrics, catfishes are completely useless in combat, but there's one exception to that rule. A catfish under the control of Master Fawn Lingxiao can be incredibly formidable, but that man is dead, and no one knows the secrets of his technique. Speaking of Fawn, he is currently cultivating the catfish on the mountaintop while thinking about all the events that led him here. He failed to achieve his goals in his past life, and the entire legacy he worked so hard to build has been ruined by that incident. However, he refuses to give up, and no matter how long it takes, he swears he will rise to the top of the league and prove himself to the world. And the first step in Fawn's plan is to reunite with his sect members, so he heads to one of the league's branches and asks to rent out the fastest pet they have. Normally, you would have to pay a large sum to rent out fast pets like a shadow panther or a blue hedgehog, but Fawn says his pavilion has a contract with the league, so he's allowed to rent out pets for free. The attendant is more than happy to help, but he is going to need to confirm which pavilion Fawn belongs to, so he asks him to perform his pavilion's signature dance. Fawn was really hoping he wouldn't have to do this because the dance is really embarrassing, but he swallows his pride and performs it anyway. The attendant thinks it's hilarious, but Fawn tells him to just hurry up and look for his pavilion's listing already. However, when the attendant finally finds it, he tells Fawn that the Lianxiao pavilion has been removed from the members list. Fawn died in May last year, and as a result of the death of its master, the Lingxiao Pavilion was demoted to C class. Then a few months later, the League issued an order to exterminate all catfish pets, and since the catfish was the pavilion's signature pet, it was demoted yet again to D class. Finally, a few months after that, they were attacked and robbed by mass sects, and due to the heavy losses that the pavilion suffered, they were subsequently removed from the League registry. Fawn can't believe all that happened in the span of a single year, but if all this is true, then he needs to hurry back to the pavilion as fast as this pig can take him. But before that, he needs to stop at a pet service center so he can take care of Tuan and Cactus. Fawn arrived at the service center, and upon entering, he goes to talk to one of the receptionists at the front desk. She asks him how she can help, so Fawn explains that 2 of his pets were severely injured a while ago, so he would like to get them fixed up as soon as possible. The receptionist takes his pets and tells Fawn he can come back to pick them up later on, so Fawn decides to do a little more shopping. He goes to buy a defense scroll so he can train his pets, and luckily, he managed to arrive just in time to receive the final defense scroll that the shop had in stock. However, just before the clerk could hand it to Fawn, a man walks in with a tied-up girl and demands to buy the scroll instead. The clerk apologizes for the inconvenience, but Fawn was here first and store policy says it's first come, first served. The man doesn't like being told no, so he becomes belligerent and threatens to burn Fawn to a crisp if he doesn't get what he wants. This is really bad for Fawn since he doesn't have his pets with him to defend himself, but just before Xu could begin his attack, he recognizes the face of Liu, and he was apparently good friends with him before Fawn took over. He pulls up a chair and asks how Liu has been since it has been a few days since he last heard from him, but Fawn doesn't want to explain that Xu's friend is actually dead and he took over Liu's body, so he makes up a fake story and says he has been sleeping at home. He wants to end this conversation as soon as possible so he doesn't get himself into trouble, but all of a sudden, Stu asks Liu if something is wrong with him, because the Liu he knows would never pass up an opportunity to drink, so it's odd that he hasn't even attempted to down any liquor yet. Fawn tries to make up an excuse and claims that he just drank too much last night, so he doesn't feel like drinking anymore, but Sue refuses to take no for an answer. He says hanging out is no fun unless they both get drunk together, and in fact, he makes a bet with Fawn and says that if he can beat him in a drinking competition, then Sue will give Fawn whatever he wants. Fawn doesn't have much of a choice here, so he decides to go along with it and hesitantly takes a bowl of alcohol to drink. The reason he is so hesitant to drink any alcohol is because in his past life, whenever he drank even a single glass of alcohol, he would turn into a bumbling idiot and would constantly humiliate himself. However, this time, even after downing dozens of drinks, Fawn is perfectly fine, but Sue, on the other hand, is totally wasted. Fawn is surprised that Liu's body has this much resistance to alcohol, but that aside, he clearly won the bet, so he tells Sue that he will be leaving now, and he is taking the scroll with him. Sue has no complaints since he is too drunk to care, but as Fawn is walking away, he notices the girl who Sue was treating as a slave, and he feels bad for her, so he decides to set her free. He takes the bag off her head, and as he is untying her, he warns the girl to stay away from people like Sue, because they are bad news. Fawn later leaves the service center because he has business to attend to, and now that he has taught his whale a defensive bubble skill, and he has healed the other two, he is prepared to pay some old friends of his a visit, but as he is leaving, the girl he saved from Sui seems to be watching him. Meanwhile, over in the Lianxiao Pavilion, Hu Ling rushes into Duan Yi's room to warn him that some people have come to attack them. Duan takes the threat very seriously, so he runs outside and finds a gang of miscreants just standing there menacingly. The leader of the gang says that it would be a shame to waste such prime real estate like this on the likes of the pavilion, so from this day forth, he claims this land will belong to his Hard Rock gang. And if the pavilion members want to live, they had better pack up and leave before he loses his patience. The gang leader seems really confident that he won't challenge because the Lingxiao Pavilion is in severe decline, but Duan Yi tells them that just because their status has dwindled doesn't mean they are weak. He summons his shade cat Jaime, and two of the gang members try to attack him with their lizard and porcupine. So they make the lizard launch the porcupine at the cat. However, Jaime is simply too fast, so she jumps out of the way, and as soon as she gets the opportunity, she dices the porcupine into pieces. The lizard then tries to attack her, but it's too slow, so she's able to sneak up behind it and slice its tail off. The gang leader is starting to get mad, so he decides to use his own beetle pet to attack since it is fast, but apparently it wasn't fast enough because Jaime rips right through its body in an instant. Duan begins insulting the gang for thinking they were strong enough to defeat his shade cat, but while Duan is monologuing, the leader secretly instructs the beetle to fire its horn, but not at Duan. Instead, he aims straight for Gu Ling to make Duan and Jaime lose their focus. Jaime immediately rushes back to save Gu Ling and destroys the horn, but in the process she lets her guard down, so the lizard is able to sneak up from behind and chomp down on Jaime's body. Meanwhile, Fawn has just arrived at the pavilion and he is glad to finally be home. But he is a bit shocked by how decrepit this place has become in the year he was gone. None of the maintenance work has been done and the front gates are wide open, but that's the least of the problems here. He hears a commotion in the courtyard, so he goes to check it out, and to his horror, he finds a lizard chewing down on Jaime's body. The lizard then throws Jaime away once it is done with her, and Duan jumps into the air to catch her body, but he ends up crashing into a pot as a result. Duan begs Jaime to hold on so he can get her treated, but it's already too late. She has lost so much blood that there's no chance of recovering, and a few moments later, Jaime dies in Duan's arms. Now all the pets of the pavilion members have been killed, leaving them completely defenseless, so the gang leader orders everyone to get out of here immediately, or he might consider doing something terrible to them. As he says this, he starts reaching for Gu Ling, but before he could hurt her, his lizard gets splashed with a strange yellow liquid. The gang leader looks up to see where the liquid came from, and he finds Juan standing on one of the rooftops, but he has no idea how a little pup managed to get here. Just then, Fawn announces himself and asks the gang leader what he thinks he is doing here, but the gang leader tells Fawn to mind his own business because he thinks Fawn is some random nobody who wants to play hero. But when Gu Ling looks at the stranger, something about him reminds her of her former master. Fawn refuses to let a bunch of gang members take over the land he worked hard to earn, so he sends one in to attack, but the gang leader thinks Fawn must be stupid because there's no way a puppy could ever compare to a dragon lizard. He sends his lizard out to cut Juan down, but to his surprise, Juan is actually able to parry the attack. This makes no sense to him because the lizard should be several times stronger than the puppy, but the surprises don't end there because Fawn instructs Juan to use his new special move, so he runs forward and headbutts the lizard in the stomach. The gang leader can't believe a puppy actually managed to defeat his dragon lizard, but it was all thanks to Fawn's careful planning. Juan's urine attack is called Feeble Urine, and it has the ability to make anyone who gets covered in it several times weaker, so as soon as the lizard got sprayed at the start of the fight, Fawn had already won. The gang leader still doesn't understand how this could have happened to him, but he refuses to lose after coming this far, so he orders all his men to summon their backup pets. The gang members do as instructed, and they plan to attack Fawn directly to make him pay for humiliating them, but Fawn isn't too worried. He pretends to be scared and runs out of the gate to lure the pets outside, and the gang members eagerly follow him because they think they really have Fawn cornered. However, when they get outside, they can't find Fawn, and they realize all their pets are gone. Just then, Fawn speaks up and tells Nyan to thank the kind men for giving him so many tasty pets to eat, and as soon as the gang members realize that Nyan is a catfish, they start freaking out. The League ordered all catfishes to be exterminated months ago, so they threaten to report Fawn for possessing a catfish, but Fawn threatens to just have Nyan eat them alive if they report him, so the gang members apologize for their earlier statements and leave because they don't want to die. Once the gang members are gone, Gu Ling comes out because she wants to thank Fawn for all his help. However, to her surprise, as soon as Fawn sees her, he gives her a big hug, saying he missed her a lot. Of course, Gu Ling still has no idea who this guy is, or she doesn't know how to react to this sudden hug. She asks Fawn if she has met him somewhere before, so he's about to explain that he is Master Fawn Lion Xiao, and that he reincarnated into this body, but then he remembers what happened with his whale. Someone must have sabotaged him that day to get him killed, and he still has no idea who did it, so until he finds more clues, he can't reveal his true identity to anyone. He decides to introduce himself as Liu Fengmeng for now and apologizes for hugging Gu Ling out of nowhere, but now that the bandits are gone, he tells Gu Ling that they need to go check on the others inside. Gu Ling is certain that she has never met Liu before, but every time she looks at him, he exudes the same aura as her master, and she can't figure out why. As Fawn walks back in, Gu Ling introduces him to everyone as the man who saved them from the gang members, but while they are all grateful after everything that has happened, none of them are in much of a talking mood. Especially Duan after Jaime's death. Jaime was the first pet he ever received from Fawn, so they've been practically inseparable for years, but now that she's gone, Duan sees no reason to continue being a pet cultivator, so he says he is leaving. Fawn remembers how Duan was the first person to join his pavilion back when Fawn first established it, and even though Fawn was a new master at the time and had no achievements under his belt, Duan still believed the pavilion could become one of the best on the continent, but all that has changed now. All the other pavilion members also lost their pets in the battle, so there's no point in remaining here any longer. Fawn tries to stop him and says he can help them rebuild, but Duan laughs in his face and asks what a stranger like him could possibly do to help them. Gu Ling begs Duan not to go because they still need to carry on their master's will, but Duan reminds her that Fawn Liang Xiao is dead, and he was the only thing holding the pavilion together. So without him, they are nothing. One by one, the other pavilion members also begin walking out because there's nothing left for them here, and they've lost all will to keep fighting. Fawn pleads with them to wait because if they just give him some time, he is sure he can resolve all their problems and restore the pavilion to its former glory. But none of them have any faith in him, so as much Fawn doesn't want to accept it, as truly is the end of the Lingjiao Pavilion. By the next morning, there are only 3 members left in the pavilion, and Gu Ling is saddened by the way things turned out. After their master's death, Duan was next in line to become the master of the pavilion because he had the greatest skills among all of them. But now that he has quit, they need to appoint a new master, and Tsai knows the perfect person for the job. At first, Fawn thinks she is referring to him, but Tsai was actually talking about appointing Gu as the new master of the pavilion, who doesn't think she's qualified to hold such a position. But since everyone insists on it, she agrees to become the master for now. Gu's picture is then put up under the master plaque, and as the new master, the others ask her what the next step for their pavilion will be. Before Gu could even say anything, Fawn speaks up and says they need to go catch some more spirit pets, but then he remembers that he isn't the master here anymore, so he apologizes for speaking out of turn. Gu agrees with Fawn's plan since all of the pavilion's pets were killed during the attack yesterday, so she pulls out a map so she can find a good place to start searching for pets. However, all the good habitats on the map have already been picked clean, so there's no way they can find any good pets nearby. Just then, Fawn speaks up and says he has a good place in mind, so later that day, everyone follows him to the secret habitat he was talking about. But when they get there, it's more crowded than Walmart on Black Friday. There's no way they'd be able to find any good pets here, but Fawn tells them this isn't the place he was talking about. He leads them further into the forest, and after making sure they weren't followed, Fawn jumps off the edge of the cliff. The others are worried that he might have hurt himself, but Fawn is perfectly fine and tells them to come down as well. He uses cactus to carefully lower everyone into the ravine, and there he shows them the entrance to his secret habitat. It is an underground cave, and since no one else should know about it yet, Fawn is confident that the Lord should still be here. Shasta gets confused when Fawn mentions a Lord, so he explains that Lord is the title given to some pets depending on their innate strength. For example, if a cat and a tiger were both level 3, then the tiger would still be stronger than the cat. Most of the pets around here are soldier class, so they are rather timid, but Lord class pets are very aggressive, so he warns everyone to be careful if they encounter one. Just then, Yui spots a flaming pet in the distance, so she asks Fawn what class it is. After taking one look, Fawn can tell that it is a 3-tailed firefox, but for a firefox to have 3 tails, it would need to be in the second phase of soul bonding, which means this fox has a master and its master must be nearby. Fawn immediately warns everyone to be careful because there's someone else in this cave, but before any of them can respond, Fawn gets attacked from behind. He managed to avoid getting hit, but the attacker tells him and the others that this is his turf, and if they don't leave right now, he will show them no mercy. He's trying to scare them away so he can capture the Lord for himself, but Fawn simply laughs in his face and says he could never beat them in a fight with his weak little fox. The others join in and say they could wipe the floor with the guy's pet without even breaking a sweat, but remember, none of them have any pets right now, so they are totally bluffing. Getting into a fight right now would be terrible, so Fawn came up with a plan and told everyone to pretend to be strong and bloodthirsty so they can scare him off. And the plan is working perfectly, mostly because the guy was weirded out by Xi's tonguing, but either way, it was enough to get Su to rethink his actions, so he decides to leave Fawn's group alone. Just then, Fawn feels an ominous pressure in the cave, and so he tells the others that the Lord has appeared. But before they could even think of a plan of action, Su and his firetails start running straight for the Lord. Fawn and the others chase after him, and when they finally reach the Lord, Fawn warns them to be careful, because it looks like it is in the mature stage, meaning it already has a unique skill. Su tells the others to stay out of his way while he subdues the panda, and Fawn doesn't intend to interfere since Su technically got here first. Su tells Firetails to attack, so it lunges at the panda, but before it could attack, the panda's horn begins to glow, and it shoots a laser that hits Su in the chest. All the color begins to drain from Su's body, and he has no idea what's going on, but a few moments later, the panda then fires a laser at Fawn. Fawn tries his best to dodge, but despite his best efforts, the laser still touches his hair, so he warns everyone else to go and hide before they get hit too. Fawn's body then begins to develop purple patches, and he is worried that he might have been poisoned, so he quickly summons Juan and asks him to use his detoxifying urine skill. Juan is confused because he doesn't see anything wrong with Fawn, but he does as instructed anyway and splashes Fawn in the face. However, the detoxifying urine seems to have no effect, so Fawn just took a face full of piss for nothing. The panda then fires another laser aimed at the firetails, and it looks like it left a severe wound, but when Su goes to check on his pet, he realizes there isn't actually any damage. It's more like someone painted over his pet's body, and it's the same with Fawn because despite looking poisoned, he feels perfectly fine. He soon realizes that the panda's ability is to absorb colors and create illusions to distract its enemies, and while that doesn't sound too dangerous at first, it's really hard to keep track of your opponent when they are able to camouflage themselves perfectly. On the bright side, since the color changing doesn't do any damage, they just need to worry about avoiding the panda's melee attacks. Sue tells Firetails to keep dodging the panda's attacks, but then the panda makes his bamboo invisible, so Firetails isn't able to see it in time to dodge. Sue is worried about Firetails' safety, so he asks Fawn for some help and promises to share the panda with him equally. Whatever that's supposed to mean. Fawn doesn't trust Sue, but he decides to help him anyway, so he asks Fawn to splash the panda with his feeble pea. The pea should have weakened the panda, so Fawn summons Cactus and asks it to bind the panda. However, they soon realize it was an illusion, and the real panda comes out of nowhere to kick the cactus away. It then creates a blinding flash of light with its horn, and by the time Fawn and Sue can see again, the panda has disappeared. They both stay alert since the panda might be hiding with his color control again, and as soon as Firetails spots something moving, it jumps into attack. However, it turned out to be a trap, and a second later, the panda drops from the ceiling to smash Firetails into the ground. It then uses its ultimate technique and shifts the color in the room to overload Fawn and Sue's brains, and while they are confused, it proceeds to beat them up, but Tuan still doesn't understand what's going on. Anyone caught in the panda's range should be disoriented by the shifting colors, but Tuan is color blind, so to him it looks like Fawn and Sue are just messing around. It eventually gets tired of watching its master lose to a panda, so while the panda isn't watching, Juan sneaks up from behind and smacks it in the head. And once the panda is on the ground, he pees on it to assert dominance. Fawn is shocked that Juan was able to beat the panda so easily, but he is glad that they finally caught the Lord. However, a moment later, Sue grabs the panda and starts running away. Fawn and the others chase after it, but Sue pulls out a dandelion pet and uses it to fly away, so there's no way they'll be able to catch him now. Fawn is disappointed that they wasted so much effort today and another Lord won't spawn here for a long time, so he suggests they just go to the market tomorrow to find some pets for everyone. Later that night, Sue carries the panda to the Temple of the East Sect, and as he arrives at the gate, he tells the guard that he is here to see Mr. Yo. The guard leads Sue to Yo, and Yo is pleasantly surprised that Sue is capable of capturing a lord all on his own. However, Sue didn't come here for empty compliments, he just wants Yo to keep his end of the bargain and release his pet. While Sue isn't paying attention, something seems to slip into his shadow, but he is too focused on Yo to notice. Yo tells his men to bring out the Ice Tails, and Sue is glad to see his pet again, but as soon as he tries to free Ice Tails, Yo's men try to capture Fire Tails. Sue demands to know what's going on here because this wasn't part of the deal, but Yo never intended to let Sue reclaim his Ice Tails. He orders his men to capture Sue, but Sue isn't a weakling, so he's able to fight them off with the help of Fire Tails. However, Yo then summons his pet, and from Sue's shadow, a giant figure emerges before slamming Sue's face into the ground. The next day, Fawn and the others head into town to buy a pet, but while Fawn is busy doing something else, the others spot a wanted poster for Liu Fengmeng in the middle of town. Gu tries to remain positive and says it might not be the same Liu who's helping them, so it would be best to keep it a secret for now and watch what he does to see if he really is a dangerous criminal. Just then, Fawn returns to the group and sees them huddled around the notice board, so he asks if something is wrong, and they all get startled. Everyone tells him they are fine though, and Fawn sees no reason to question it, so he tells everyone to hurry up so they can go buy some pets. But first they need money, so they head to the bank and Gu performs the pavilion's dance to access their account. But to her dismay, the teller tells her that someone withdrew all their money a few days ago. Gu breaks down in tears because she can't believe they got robbed of all their money, but then Fawn remembers that he was the one who withdrew that money when he was first reincarnated. Luckily, he didn't spend all of it, so he tells Gu he has some money they can use to shop for pets, although he decides to leave out the part about how he got it. The four of them then head out into the market, and as soon as they get there, Gu falls in love with this scent skipper. She thinks it's really cute, but it costs 20 tal, and they can't afford that right now. Yui immediately enters haggling mode and starts badgering the shopkeeper to reduce the price by calling the scent skippers ugly, dull, and useless. Eventually, she does manage to get a good deal for it, but at the cost of the scent skipper's self-confidence. After seeing Yui work her magic, Axe asks her for some help because she wants to get one of these pets, and with how goofy they look, Yui has all the ammunition she needs to bargain. Now, both Axe and Gu have pets, but Yui hasn't chosen anything for herself yet, so they continue walking around the market. Suddenly, a man calls out to Yui and offers to sell her a new pet he just acquired, but the group immediately recognizes it as the panda that Sue stole from them yesterday. That panda is rightfully theirs, so Fu demands that the shopkeeper return it immediately. But while the shopkeeper knows it's a stolen pet, he isn't worried because he recognizes the uniform of the Lianjiao Pavilion, and he knows they are too weak to be a threat to him. He is part of the East Sect under Yo, and this isn't the first time the East Sect has robbed the pavilion, so Gu is starting to get angry. But the shopkeeper tells her she can't attack him because it's against the League's rules to use pets in public. That may be true, but the rules don't say anything about using a pet that doesn't have a master yet, so Xia approaches the panda and gives it an idea. After a few moments, she gets the shopkeeper's attention and tells him that the panda managed to escape while he was arguing with Gu, and the keeper starts panicking because Yo would kill him if he found out he lost the panda lord. He opens the cage to try to go after it, but when he tries crawling into the hole, he realizes it was all an illusion and the panda is still inside the cage. And as you can imagine, it is not happy. The shopkeeper gets knocked out in one punch, but the panda is still dangerous, so Fawn is worried it might hurt someone. However, Yui tells him he doesn't need to worry. She approaches the panda and tells him the story of how her sect has fallen into ruin, and the entire time she was powerless to help her friends. So she asks him to become her spiritual pet so they can both get strong together. The panda sympathizes with her, so it agrees to become Yui's pet. But this is the first pet Yui has ever had, and she isn't familiar with the bonding process, so Gu explains how it's done and shows her the correct position. Once the ritual is complete, Yui has officially bonded with the panda lord and Fawn is happy for her, but a moment later, he notices Firetails tied up in the shop. From what he recalls, Su really cared about Firetails, so Fawn finds it hard to believe that Su would sell his pet so easily. Fawn releases the Fire and Ice Tails, and they tell him that Su was captured and is being held hostage. Kexi asks Fawn if they should try to save him, but the East Sect is a lot stronger than they are, and their leader is as strong as his spirit general, so they are severely outmatched. However, Fawn says he knows of a way that they can beat the East Sect, so he tells everyone they should head home because he has something he wants to show them. Before Fawn died, he had hidden several upgrade pills under a tree, and with these pills, everyone will be able to make their pets stronger. Meanwhile, over in Yo's sect, Su is chained up and is being tortured in order to force him to dissolve the contract he has with his pets. But even if Su were to do what Yo wants, he knows he would still be killed regardless. That same night, Fawn and the others begin their raid, and Su can hear all the commotion outside, but he has no idea what's going on. Eventually, Fawn's group arrives at Su's cell, and they are here to bust him out. After releasing Su, Fire and Ice Tails run over to him, and he is so glad to see that they are okay. But he doesn't understand why Fawn would go so far to help him. However, Fawn simply tells him that they are here on a mission today, and Su is pretty strong, so they could really use his help. That's all Su needed to hear, so he grabs his shirt, and everyone heads out to raid the East Sect. A little while later, Yo arrives and finds a bunch of his guards beaten up on the floor. The guard tells him they are being raided, and Yo is surprised that someone was bold enough to raid his sect. Fawn is currently looking for Yo so he can challenge him, but he accidentally stumbles across Yo's treasure room instead, and this is honestly way better. There are a ton of rare things here, including rare antiques, advanced scrolls, and even upgrading material. This works out really well for Fawn since he can finally upgrade Teddy and Cactus out, but upgrades take a while, so he's going to have to wait until after he has defeated Yo. However, just then, Yo emerges from the shadows and tells Fawn he is willing to share those upgrade materials with him if he joins the East Sect. Fawn tells him he appreciates the offer, but he is already part of a Lianjiao Pavilion and he is here to avenge them. Yo tells Fawn that if he really wants to avenge the pavilion, then he should be going after the traitor who set up their master and got him killed. Fawn refuses to believe that one of his pavilion members really betrayed him, and Yo doesn't intend to waste any time convincing him, so he begins his attack and aims right for Fawn's eyes. Luckily, Cactus is able to pull him to safety, but Yo sends his shadow pet after him again. Fawn runs through the treasure room to try to get away from it, but the shadow is too fast, so he starts grabbing antiques off the shelves and throwing them at it. He wasn't expecting the antiques to do much, but to his surprise, the shadow actually stops chasing him because Yo cares a lot about these antiques, so he's putting them back on the shelves with him. That gives Fawn an idea, so he instructs Teddy to punch a vase off the top shelf, and when it hits the floor, Yo screams because that thing cost him a ton of money. Right after that, Cactus jumps up onto a shelf and proceeds to pull it down onto Yo to bury him, but just when Fawn thought the fight was over, Yo's shadow stabs him through the chest. He realizes the shadow is too strong for him to defeat on his own, so he needs to regroup with Gu and the others as soon as possible. Gu's group has just finished releasing all the pets that Yo held captive, but then she hears an explosion coming from the area Fawn went to, and she is starting to get worried. Fawn eventually makes his way over to Gu's group, but he is heavily injured, so he asks the others to buy him some time while Goo's scent skipper heals him. Just then, Yo's shadow arrives and goes straight for Sue, but before Sue could be hurt, his Fire and Ice Tails jump in to save him. Fairy Tails tries to blast the shadow, but the shadow vanishes and then reappears behind Sue. It is about to knock Sue out, but Ice Tails shoots the shadow before its punch could land. The shadow then slinks away, so Fawn tells Yui to use her panda's light skill to weaken the shadow. It seems to work since the shadow is forced to back off and the scent skipper has finished healing Fawn, so he can finally rejoin the fight. However, his pets are still in the middle of the upgrade, so Fawn won't be able to use them for a while. The rest of the pets coordinate their attacks, and while Fire and Ice Tails restrain the shadow, Kite prepares to use Thornback as a kinetic bomb. However, Yo refuses to let his shadow be defeated so easily, so he awakens its second phase and covers the shadow in bone armor. The buff makes the shadow strong enough to break free from the twin tails, and it is easily able to knock out all the pets nearby. Now, everyone except Guling has been defeated, and since she is the master of the pavilion now, Yo is going to enjoy crushing her. The shadow raises its hand to attack, but just before it could slash Gu, it is stopped by Fawn's catfish. Fawn's pet upgrades are finally done, so Nyan has gotten a lot bigger and is more versatile in combat. Yo can't believe that he is really looking at catfish because they were all exterminated months ago, and Gu is just as surprised as Yo is because the only person she knows who can wield a catfish like this is her master. Fawn manages to push Yo's shadow back, so Yo switches tactics and decides to use ranged attacks. Nyan flies around to dodge the shadow spikes, but he eventually gets stabbed in the gills, and from there Yo's shadow pins him to the ground. This would normally be really bad for Nyan, but luckily, Fawn bought a bubble defense scroll a while ago, so he's able to push the shadow away, and at the same time, Fawn instructs Cactus to restrain the shadow, so vines emerge from the ground to hold him down. And now that the shadow is stuck in one place, Nyan can work his magic. He bites down on the shadow's head and begins sucking, but Yo knows what happens next, and he absolutely refuses to let Shadow get devoured. He tells Shadow to escape at any cost, so Shadow digs his claws into Nyan's sides, but Nyan keeps sucking like his life depends on it. Shadow tries anchoring itself to the ground, but Fawn already planned for this, so he tells Nyan to drag Shadow into the sky. Now Shadow has nothing to grab onto, so he is helplessly sucked into Nyan's belly. Shadow's physical form has been destroyed, but as long as his core remains, Yo will be able to resummon him, so they need to destroy it quickly. Sue sends Fire Tails after the core, but before it could be destroyed, Yo uses what's left of Shadow to punch Fire Tails away. The core is damaged in the process, but is still in one piece, so Fawn and Nyan start running over to smash it. However, before they could do that, two shadowy hands emerge and pin them to the ground. Fawn has no strength left in him, and if Yo manages to resummon Shadow, then all they are doomed because everyone has been knocked out. But just as Yo is about to summon Shadow again, that girl Fawn saved in town shows up out of nowhere and smashes the core. She's a little confused since she doesn't know what's going on here, but Yo attacks her, so she sidekicks him with her hoof. And if you've ever been kicked by a deer, you know Yo just lost a bunch of teeth and ruptured his spleen. The girl has been following Fawn ever since he saved her because she is grateful, but also because she has a crush on Fawn. However, she is too shy to admit that, so she covers her face and runs into the forest, leaving Fawn very confused. A little while later, everyone wakes up, so they begin gathering all of Yo's treasure, but Sue gets a little greedy and demands 70% of the profit for himself. Luckily, after Fawn upgraded Teddy, he unlocked a new ability, Amnesia Piss, so Fawn sprays Sue with it, and he suddenly forgets what he was talking about. She then convinces him that he agreed to give up his share of the loot as an apology for stealing the panda last time, and Sue doesn't question it. Now that that's been settled, Fawn tells everyone to go pick out any suitable pets from Yo's collection. Just then, Fawn finds a fire steel ball, and he thinks it would suit him well, so he prepares to form a contract with it. For some reason, he faces some resistance, but with his mastery of pet bonding, he is eventually able to form the contract. However, moments later, Fawn feels a strange pressure within his body and collapses to the ground. The others rush over to check on him, and the next morning, Fawn wakes up in his bed with She standing over him. She got really worried when Fawn collapsed out of nowhere, but since he's awake now, she and Yui are going to make him a good meal to restore his strength. Fawn doesn't understand what happened to him earlier, but he remembers being attacked by a strange force right after he tamed the steel ball. That aside, he is glad they managed to acquire all those upgrading materials from the East Sect, because now everyone's pets will be able to level up. Speaking of which, he recalls that catfishes get a storage space when they level up, so he asks Nyan to take him inside because he wants to check out how big it is. Nyan is happy to oblige, so he swallows Fawn, and Fawn is pleased with how it looks. With this rate of growth, everyone's pets should be able to reach the third stage of soul bonding before they derank sect assessment in a few months. But before all that, Fawn needs to figure out who the traitor who sabotaged him in his past life was. There's no way it was Gu Ling or the others here, so he believes it must be someone outside his sect who betrayed him. But until he figures out who that person is, he's going to have to stay on guard. Just then, Fawn recalls that he used Nyan in front of Gu, so he should probably go talk to her about it. He finds Gu out in the shrine she made to honor her deceased master, and she apologizes for making Fawn put in so much work for the good of the pavilion when he is still a newcomer. But ever since Fawn joined them, she feels like they might truly be able to restore the pavilion to its former glory. Fawn tells her that he didn't do anything on his own and it was all a team effort, but that aside, there's something he needs to talk to her about. Fawn explains the whole story about the catfish and how he acquired it, but he leaves out the part about him being her reincarnated master. Gu admits that she was shocked when she saw him using a catfish, but putting that aside for now, there's something she wants to show him. She pulls out the wanted poster she saw in town and asks Fawn if it is really true that he's a lecherous chest grabber. Fawn was really hoping he could just forget the whole incident with Bai, but he still has no idea what Liu did to make her so mad. He swears to Gu that he isn't a pervert, and this whole thing is just a huge misunderstanding. And Gu believes him because he has proven himself to be a trustworthy ally. He has been here for several days now, and Fawn hasn't exhibited any degenerate behavior. And she feels like she has known him for years, even though they just met. The way Fawn behaves, the way he handles enemies, and the way he controls his catfish all reminds her of her master, and she knows the similarities are no mere coincidence, so she asks Fawn to tell her the truth. She wants to know if he's her master. She and Yui are listening in on the conversation, but they only heard the part about Fawn possibly being a chest fondler, so they are waiting to see what happens. Meanwhile, Fawn is contemplating whether he should tell Gu the truth or not. He still hasn't figured out who the traitor was, and until then it would be dangerous to reveal his identity, so he decides to keep it a secret and to convince Gu that he isn't her master. He grabs her by the shoulders and says he is chronic gooner. As soon as Yui and Shai hear that, they barge into the room and tie Fawn up for his behavior. He really wishes he didn't have to ruin his image like that, but at least this way his secret is safe, so he can continue investigating. She then takes him away so he can reflect on his actions, and Yui asks Gu if she really thinks Fawn is related to their master somehow. Gu admits that she thought that initially, but if Fawn really is a degenerate, then there's no way he could have anything to do with their master. Regardless, their priority right now should be to prepare for the D-Class promotion tournament, because they need to advance their sect. A few days later, it is finally time for the tournament, and the group is going to be traveling on these pigs, and she seems enthusiastic, but she has never ridden one before, so she ends up crashing into a tree. Gu apologizes for not being able to arrange better transportation for the group, but their budget is really tight, so this is the best they've got. They eventually get on the road, and they are all pretty nervous since they've been working hard to prepare themselves for this day. All the plane factions are going to gather on the competition island, and normally only around 4 or 5 plane factions participate each year. Just then, Fawn notices someone following them, but it turns out that it's just that sheep girl from before. She has been spying on Fawn for a while now, but whenever Gu tried to talk to her, she would get embarrassed and run away. Gu assumes the girl is just really shy, and there's no need to be concerned about her following them, so they continue traveling to the examination center. Once they arrive at the center, they are surprised to see so many people gathered here. As they walk up to the registration desk, all the other participants begin insulting them, and it's really starting to get on Xi's nerves, but Gu tells her to just ignore them. They eventually make it to the registration desk, and Gu is pleasantly surprised to find out that the examiner is an old friend of hers, Master Li. Li is just as happy to see her, and Gu walks up to register. But before that, she asks why there are so many participants this year. Li tells her it's because of the pavilion, but Gu doesn't understand what he's talking about, so Li explains that after the Lianzhou pavilion's decline, a lot of its resources were stolen by the various unknown factions of criminals. And thanks to the materials they stole, they were able to qualify for the promotion exam. The criminals shamelessly mock the pavilion for being such an easy target, but Li tells everyone to shut up. He then addresses Gu, and as much as he hates to say this, there are only 8 spots on the roster, so if who wants the pavilion to participate in the tournament, then they are going to have to fight with the other factions to decide who gets to qualify. All the factions there begin laughing at the pavilion because they believe its members are too insignificant to put up a decent fight, especially with a weakling like Gu as their master. However, Fawn gets in front of her and asks if she remembers the names of the factions they robbed the pavilion. Gu tells him it was the Hongfu, Guangshao, Shengnan, and Yayang were responsible, so Fawn calls them out. Fawn remembers the Hongfu faction and its leader in particular, Wang Fuge. A couple of years ago, the Hongfu faction got robbed, so Wang came to Fan begging for assistance. If it weren't for Fan's kindness towards Wang, the Hongfu faction wouldn't exist today, but Wang couldn't care less. Running a faction is a cruel business, and hair replacement surgery isn't going to pay for itself, so he's got to do what he's got to do. And as soon as he saw an opportunity to rob the pavilion, he did so with no remorse. Fan is disappointed that Wang would stoop so low, but hearing him talk about it so shamelessly makes it a lot easier for Fan to take his revenge. Fan summons Teddy, and all the opposing factions are shocked because Teddy is level 8. They had thought the pavilion wouldn't have any strong pets left. Wang encourages his men to stay focused because a single dog can't beat all 3 of them. However, a moment later, all their pets get grabbed by an uprated cactus's vines, and Teddy seizes the opportunity to run up and pee on Wang. And with Teddy's new level, he unlocked Poison Pea, so Wang doesn't have long before it takes effect. He starts calling over to the other criminal factions to help him take Fan down, but to his dismay, he finds out that all the pavilion members have leveled up their pets and were able to easily defeat the other factions. Fan then grabs Wang by the shirt and demands that he, along with all the other factions that robbed the pavilion, must return everything they stole with 200% interest. The other factions' leaders are so scared that they immediately agree to pay the pavilion, and Wang says he is even willing to become Fan's hype man just so Fan will undo the poison. Fan is starting to feel bad because Wang looks even uglier with purple duck lips, so he throws him to the ground and tells Teddy to spray him with some detoxifying pee. Lee is truly impressed by the strength of the pavilion, and since those 4 problematic factions have dropped out of the tournament, the pavilion has secured its spot on the roster. The factions that will proceed from this center will be the Lianxiao Pavilion, Wanwu Gate, and Beimu Study. Just then, Shai realizes that Su is here, and she is shocked that he's a member of the Beimu Study. Even Fan thought Su was a factionless trainer, but Su proudly states that it's perfectly natural for someone as strong as him to join a faction. But he is a bit surprised by how much Fan and the others have improved since the last time he saw them. He acknowledges that they are strong, so he asks if they would be willing to form an alliance with his faction. As soon as he says this, the leader of the Wandu faction recognizes an opportunity to make strong allies, so he offers an alliance as well. However, Su rejects him because he thinks the Wandu faction is too weak. This gets the Wandu leader mad, and Fan chooses to stay out of it because he would rather not make enemies before the tournament even begins. Just then, the master of the Beimu Study tells Su to shut up, and Su immediately stops trash-talking because he doesn't want to upset her. Fan is intrigued by the fact that the master of the Beimu faction is an old lady, but she seems pretty powerful, so he can't afford to underestimate her. The participants are all informed that they need to head to the tournament island soon, so they should get on their respective catfins, and a second later, a catfins lands in front of the pavilion members. Yuri is freaking out because she has never had to ride a pet as big as this before, but the others don't seem to have much trouble with it. After arriving on the island, they are greeted by another examiner named Lu, and she is surprised to see that the pavilion is here. Lei explains that they will be participating in this year's tournament, and that Gu has become the new master of the pavilion, so Lu rushes over to tell Gu that she's a huge fan of the pavilion. It rose to power so quickly under Master Fan's leadership, and he was always able to defeat his opponents with overwhelming skill. But it's a shame that the pavilion declined after his death. Gu tells Lu that they are here to restore the pavilion to its former glory, and Lu is glad to hear that, so she wishes Gu and the others good luck. The leader of the Wangu faction doesn't think it's fair that the examiners already like the pavilion so much, but it would be best for him to get on the pavilion's good side since they seem strong. A little while later, Lu gathers everyone and tells them she's about to hand out an item that's very important for the tournament. She pulls the rings off one of her pets and puts it on Gu's wrist. She then explains that it is a new pet developed by the League. It's called a consonance, and when a player wears a bracelet from the consonance's head, it is able to collect real-time data, allowing the examiners to keep track of each player. She informs everyone that there are 3 rules in this tournament. You must wear your bracelet at all times, you can't fall in the water, or you're disqualified, and it is forbidden to attack anyone who has surrendered. Breaking any of the rules will result in immediate disqualification. And now that everyone is clear on that, it is time for them to be taken to their starting locations. The test will be beginning soon, so Lu is going to have to leave the island. But before she goes, she tells Gu that she sincerely hopes the pavilion can make a comeback. Meanwhile, the Bai family is heading for the examination center, and once they arrive, Bai Tanshu greets Lord Li. Tanshu is a supervisor of the competition, so he apologizes for being late. He also brought his little sister, Bai Liansu, with him because she said she wants to observe. Liansu heard someone mention the Lianxiao Pavilion earlier, and she recalls that they used to be a B-class faction, but it's pitiful that they are now starting over from scratch. Lu doesn't trust the Bais because rumor has it that Master Fan's death was caused by someone related to them. However, Tanshu tells her that the rumors are not true. He is sure that his family would never do something as vile as to assassinate a master, and Lu begins apologizing profusely for saying such a thing about the Bai family. Tanshu tells her he doesn't mind since he understands where the rumors came from. At the time of the incident, both the Bai and Lianjiao factions were B-class, so it makes sense that people would think they were competing with each other. But Tanshu was lucky enough to get to face Master Fan in a duel before he died, and even though they were the same age, he was so strong that Tanshu stood no chance. He has nothing but respect for that man, so what happened to him was truly a shame. That aside, the competition is about to begin, so Li asks Tanshu to come outside to announce the beginning of the tournament. The island begins to transform, revealing a vast arena, and all the consonances are activated to keep track of the participants. A chunky consonance on top of the mountain then spits out a bunch of glowing orbs, and they are scattered all across the island. Li explains that there are 500 orbs in total, and participants will earn points for each one they collect. Once 300 have been collected, the next phase of the tournament will begin, but she is a little surprised that all they need to do is collect the orbs because it seems a little too easy. But when Gu placed one next to her ring, it is absorbed and a point is added to their total, so maybe it really is that easy. She then spots another orb nearby, so she goes to pick it up, but before she could grab it, a gopher pet grabs it and runs away. The rest of the orbs across the island are also starting to disappear, so the other teams must have started collecting them as well. She is worried that if they don't act quickly, then all the orbs will be taken, so Fan comes up with a plan. Considering the fact that there are only 500 orbs on the island and the next phase will start once 300 orbs have been collected, then they need to gather 20 orbs to guarantee a spot at the top. That means each member needs to gather at least 5 orbs, and they'll all meet back here once the phase is over. Meanwhile, in the exam center, Tanshu and Liansu are walking around, and Liansu is impressed by how quickly the teams are collecting orbs. She is especially surprised by one team because a member has already gathered 18 orbs. It looks like this consonant's pet is for the Tianyuan sect, and Li thinks they are quite interesting because they've been using a loophole in the rules to gather orbs quickly. That red symbol on the consonants means they've removed their rings, and according to the rules, as long as they put it back on within 3 minutes, they won't be disqualified. Once the Tianyuan group figured out the loophole, they gave their rings to their pets so they could gather the orbs for them, and it has been working out great for them. Just then, a man named Shang Liao shows up holding all their pets, and he's got whatever this is for a pet, so he is able to wipe out all the members of the Tianyuan sect. Over in the control room, Liansu is shocked to see that all the members of the Tianyuan sect were eliminated at the same time. According to the consonances, the reason for the Tianyuan's elimination was because they didn't put their rings back on in time, but given how smart they were with the loophole, Li doesn't think they could have messed up the timing. He believes they might have been attacked, so he sends 2 examiners out to check on the situation. Meanwhile, Fan is busy collecting orbs with Teddy and Cactus, but after he absorbs one, a team nearby notices him, so he has to hide. The team belongs to the Hongluan sect, and Fan recalls that it's the same sect that Xu belongs to, so they might know Liu. Just then, Teddy runs out and starts licking the girl on the team because he recognizes her, and the girl recognizes Teddy as Liu's dog, so she knows he must be nearby and yells for him to come out. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Guling has just found an orb, but as soon as she picks it up, she gets jumped by a sect, and it looks like Duan Yi is a member. Gu is glad to see Duan again and asks him what he is doing here, but before that, he clarifies that he isn't a member of this loser faction. The 2 attackers tell Duan that they saw Gu first, so he had better get out of here unless he wants to become their next target, but Duan completely ignores them and continues chatting with Gu because it has been a while since he last saw her. The 2 nature faction members are now infuriated, so one of them summons a pet and tells it to attack, but before it could even do anything, it is torn to shreds by Duan's pet. Gu recognizes those paws and tails, and she is delighted to find out that Hemi is still alive, so she runs over to see her. However, as she gets closer, she realizes that something is really wrong. For some reason, Hemi looks like a decaying corpse, but she doesn't have any time to ask Duan about it because the nature faction members launch another attack. Gu yells to warn Duan, but he's already aware and takes control of Hemi to obliterate nature's pets in brutal fashion. He then instructs Hemi to attack the faction members, and the 2 of them are terrified, so they immediately surrender. And according to the rules, Duan isn't allowed to hurt them once they surrender, but the rules don't say anything about scaring them, so Duan has Hemi launch a harmless blast near their faces. Once the message has been sent, Hemi walks away and starts eating the remains of the pets she killed. Gu asks Duan what happened to Hemi, but Duan tells her it's pretty obvious. Jaime was revived thanks to the power of the Rakshas faction that Duan joined. He also tells Gu that there's no need for her to continue to struggle as part of the pavilion because he can get her a spot as a member of the Rakshas faction alongside him. But instead, Gu asks Duan to come back to the pavilion because thanks to their new member, they have a good chance of returning to their former glory. Duan scoffs at the idea, but Gu tells him she is serious. In fact, after a single month of training with Liu, everyone at the pavilion was able to level up their pets to the soul-building stage. But Duan doesn't think it's all that impressive. He says Liu is just a cunning outsider, and there's no way they could rejuvenate the pavilion with a few random pets. Gu admits that it will be difficult, but if Duan were to come back, she's sure they could make it work. However, Duan never wants to be associated with the pavilion again. He's not going to fight Gu in this tournament out of courtesy for everything they've been through together, but from this moment on, he thinks of her as nothing more than a stranger. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Shai and Thorn have just found their fourth orb, and Shai is really excited, but he is also upset because even though Thorn is in the 6th soul-building stage, he's still got that goofy look on his face. If it doesn't change soon, then people won't take him seriously when he becomes rich and powerful. While Shai was busy contemplating whether he should get a new pet to replace Thorn, Thorn went out to go grab the orb. Shai tries to stop him at first because there could be something nearby waiting to ambush them, but a few seconds pass and no one shows up, so Shai thinks it's safe. But as soon as he's about to absorb the orb, a boy comes out of nowhere and demands that he hand it over. Shai does a quick height check and determines that the boy must be a lot younger than him, so he wonders how he got here. He asks him if he's an examiner's little brother or something, but Nishin informs him that he is the master of a super cool Invincible Temple faction. Shai finds it hard to take him seriously when his faction has such a childish name, so he figures he must just be a weak kid who's calling himself the faction leader. He absorbs the orb right in front of Nishin and tells him there's nothing he can do about it. But a second later, Nishin's body starts glowing and Shai realizes he might have messed up. The energy from Nishin's summoned pet can be seen all across the island, and before long, an Emperor-class dragon descends from the sky. It is so spectacular that it even garners the governor's attention, so he pulls Nishin's file and finds out that he's a part of the 8th region. He asks the 8th region representatives if they know who he is, and after thinking about it, they realize it must be Nishin Lone. They signed the participation form for him, but they thought he was just joking because the name he chose for his faction sounded ridiculous. And besides, it's really hard for a child to cultivate, so his spiritual pet pool shouldn't be large enough to contain an emperor pet. However, Tanshu tells them there's a way to make it happen. It is a procedure called spiritual pet accompany, and if a trainer is talented enough, then when he is little, a pet embryo is implanted into his spiritual pool directly. This creates an unbreakable bond between the pet and trainer, so the pet's strength isn't limited to the size of the trainer's spiritual pool. Liansu had no idea something like that was even possible, so she asks why she didn't get a pet accompany when she was little, but Tanshu reiterates that the trainer needs to be very talented for the procedure to succeed, and Liansu is mid at best. Besides, conditions for a successful pet accompany are very strict and strenuous, so it is very rare for it to actually succeed. But what puzzles Tanshu the most about this is the fact that Nishin was able to achieve a pet accompany without being part of a prominent faction. He is certain that Nishin must be a very interesting boy, and right now, Shai has to face him in battle. Shai immediately recognizes Nishin's pet as a spiritual pet accompany, and seeing it brings back traumatic memories from his childhood. His family tried to perform the procedure on him when he was little, but Shai didn't have the talent to complete it successfully, so he had to suffer through countless excruciating failures. He was called a waste over and over by people who saw him as nothing more than a host, and even Shai's father turned his back on him because of it. Now Shai is faced with the embodiment of everything he failed to become, and it is incredibly frustrating, but he vows to prove that he can still become great without a pet accompany, and he will do it by defeating Nishin. Nishin accepts the challenge and sends his dragon after Shai, so Shai grabs Thorn and tries to jump out of the way. Meanwhile, in the control room, Liansu asks her brother if there's even a point to this competition, since it's obvious that an emperor pet would outclass every other pet on the island. But Tanshu tells her it's not that simple. There is one major fault that pet accompany, and that's the fact that pet's growth is closely tied to its master's cultivation. And generally, children are high-level cultivators, so Nishin most likely hasn't mastered proper control over his dragon yet. Back to the fight. It looks like Tanshu was right because Nishin's attack completely missed Shai, and the dragon ended up crashing into the ground. Nishin gets annoyed and starts yelling at Scale for messing up such a straightforward attack, but Scale starts yelling back at him because Nishan's instructions were more confusing than rocket science. The two then start going back and forth over whose fault this is, completely forgetting that they are supposed to be fighting Shai. Shai decides to seize the opportunity to launch a surprise attack, so he has Thorn enchant a rock, and after throwing it in the air, he launches several rock shards at Nishan. Nishan and Scale instantly stop arguing, and Scale fires a blast to destroy the spikes before they hit Nishan. But in the process, he also accidentally hits the island, and the lion turtle is not happy about that. Shai uses the momentary distraction to sneak up behind Nishan, and he's about to land a punch on him, but Nishan has a trick up his sleeve. He asks Scale to give him 5 points of strength, and his eyes suddenly begin glowing. Nishan's strength suddenly rises dramatically, so he is able to blow Shai away. But Shai doesn't understand how a trainer could possibly have so much strength. Nishan is proud of himself because this is one of the special abilities of an Emperor pet that he recently unlocked, and it boosts him so much that he is now stronger than Thorn, so nothing he does will hurt Nishan anymore. Shai tries to punch Nishan while he is gloating about his strength, but Nishan easily grabs his hand and punches Shai away. However, Shai refuses to give up, so he and Thorn begin attacking at the same time to try to overwhelm Nishan. But no matter how many times he tries, Nishan is simply too strong for him to defeat. Eventually, Nishan starts wondering why Shai refuses to give up because it's clear he can't win, but Shai was just buying time because he realized the technique Nishan is using must have a time limit, and as soon as Nishan runs out of energy, Shai launches an attack with Thorn. Unfortunately, there's no limit on how many times Nishan can reactivate the techniques, so as soon as he spots Thorn heading his way, he asks Scale to give him 10 more points of strength, and this raises his power so much that he is able to knock Thorn out in one punch. However, he's not done yet. He doesn't want to give Thorn a chance to recover, so he hits him with a hammer fist and then goes to land a killing blow on Shai. But a man suddenly yells for Nishan to stop, so Nishan pulls his punch back an inch away from Shai's face, and from the force behind it, Shai definitely would have died if it connected. Nishan whines to his dad that it's not fair to interrupt his fight out of nowhere, but his dad points out that Nishan was totally about to murder that poor boy. Plus, summoning Scale came with a whole intro animation, so Nishan has most likely drawn the attention of everyone on the island by now. Nishan tries to defend himself and says Shai was being really annoying, so Nishan's dad goes up to Shai and attempts to resolve this peacefully. He tells Shai that he must have realized the difference in their strength by now, so he should understand that there's no way he can win. He promises to let Shai live if he surrenders right now, but Shai knows the man doesn't really want to kill anyone, so he says he would rather die than surrender. Nishan begins laughing at his dad because Shai just called his bluff and his dad doesn't know what to do at this point, so he decides to just leave Shai alone so he and Nishan can go gather more orbs. He asks Nishan how many orbs he has managed to gather so far, and Nishan proudly shows him that he has gotten one. Nishan's dad begins raising his hand, and when Shai sees this, years of trauma from his dad beating him come flooding back, so he thinks Nishan's dad is about to hit him for only having one orb. However, Nishan's dad is actually a good father, so instead he congratulates Nishan for managing to get an orb, and Nishan seems really happy. Seeing this makes Shai really sad and jealous because not only did Nishan possess the power he failed to acquire when he was a kid, but he also has a loving father, so Shai is taking a lot of L's today. Thorn can see that he's upset, so he tries cheering him up, and Shai realizes there's no point in wallowing in self-pity, so he gets up and tells Nishan that he will become strong enough to beat him one day. And Nishan promises to give him a rematch whenever he wants. Meanwhile, Yui and Panda haven't had much trouble on their end so far. Thanks to Panda's help, she has successfully gathered all the orbs she needs, so while the panda may seem a little grumpy, she thinks he is very reliable. Just then, she notices a few orb lights disappearing one after another, meaning someone must be over there collecting them. Yui briefly considers confronting them, but she has collected enough orbs to pass the tests, so she doesn't want to risk getting into any fights. However, before she can leave, Panda has already started walking toward the opponents, so Yui has to follow him. Unfortunately, it turns out that there are 3 of them here, and Yui isn't confident that she can handle 3 people at once, so she's hesitant to attack. But Panda, on the other hand, is already out there demanding that the girls hand over their orbs. Yui thinks it's strange that the girls are all holding the orbs in their hands instead of absorbing it into their bracelets, since that's kind of the whole point of this challenge. But the girls still refuse to hand the orbs over, so Panda gets angry and attacks the one with green hair. This leaves the girls with no choice, so they all summon their pets and attack. Unfortunately, while their pets may be cute, they are also ridiculously weak, so Panda knocks them all out in an instant. Yui is starting to feel bad because the girls are now cowering in fear from Panda, but this is still a competition. So she tells them that if they hand over their orbs, then she will let them go. However, the girls beg her not to take their orbs, because if she does, then their friend Yami will die. It sounds like the situation is really complicated, so Yui sits down with them so they can explain the whole story to her. The girls tell Yui that they are a new idol group from the Kinyu house, so their master asked them to join this competition as a publicity stunt. He arranged everything for them ahead of time and told them that simply joining would be enough, so they shouldn't worry about winning. However, they never expected the other pet masters here to be so malicious, because even though the girls had nothing to offer, they were still attacked. And the pets they have are completely useless in a fight, so they were defenseless. And to make matters worse, an evil man kidnapped Yami and demanded that the rest of them bring him 5 orbs if they want to see her alive again. Yui has heard enough, so she asks the girls to show her where this evil man is so she can take care of him. The girls are thankful for Yui's help, so they lead her to the place where Yami is being held captive. When they arrive, the man is surprised to see that they've come back so soon, so he asks if they gathered the orbs he demanded. However, the girls show him that they only managed to gather 3 orbs instead of 5, so the man threatens to kill Yanmai right here for their failure. He orders his, whatever that is, to clamp down on Yanmai's head as hard as it can, but just before the man's pet could pop her head, the girls plead with him to stop because they know of a method that he can guarantee his victory. This gets the man's attention, so he stops squeezing Yami's head and watches eagerly as one of the girls reaches into her sleeve. However, that was just a distraction to buy enough time for Panda to sneak up on him, and Panda successfully manages to pull the pet away from Yami to keep her safe. Once the man realizes he is being attacked, he orders his pet to fight back against Panda, but with a single punch, Panda completely disintegrates the pet's entire body, leaving the man speechless. The girls begin to cheer because they think they've defeated the man, but the man still has a backup plan in place, so he points to Yami and tells everyone that he already implanted a spine-breaking worm in her neck, so if any of them make another move against him, then he will kill Yami instantly. Yami is clearly in a lot of pain, so for her safety, Yui is forced to stop attacking the man. The man now believes he has the upper hand, so he walks over to Yui and tells her that she can either watch Yami die, or they all let him implant worms in their necks so he can make them his tools. And if they are lucky, once the tournament is over, he may be willing to let them go. Maybe. He tells her to hurry up and make a choice because he hasn't got all day, but those words send Yui into a flashback where she experienced something similar. Before she joined the pavilion, she and her former team had been massacred, but since she was still conscious, the one responsible decided to toy with her a little. He told Yui to choose one person who will get to leave here alive, one of her 2 friends or herself. Yui ended up choosing herself, and she's felt guilty ever since for what happened that day, but she refuses to let the same thing happen again. Red energy begins flowing from Yui's body as she smacks the worm out of the man's hand, and before he can react, she twists his arm and squishes his head between her thighs to slam him into the ground. Yui eventually chokes the man out, so the worm he implanted in Yamei's neck loses its grip and Panda is able to remove it without hurting her. The girls are all relieved that Yami is finally safe, so they run over to hug her. But when they turn to Yui to thank her for her help, they realize that there's something wrong with her because she mumbles the words, "Go away," and collapses on the floor. Seeing this, they all rush over to check on Yui, and when she finally wakes up, she seems fine, but she has no memory of what happened a few minutes ago. She asks the girls what happened to the man. So they explain that Yui knocked him out, and he probably won't be able to get up for a while. Yui is shocked to hear that she was the one who knocked him out because she doesn't remember doing that. But since the problem has been resolved, she really needs to get back to her team now, so she says goodbye to the girls. However, before she leaves, the girls ask her which faction she's part of, and after Yui informs them that she's a member of the Lianjiao Pavilion, they give her the orbs they collected and say they have a favor to ask. They don't intend to participate in the competition anymore, so once everything is over, they ask Yui to allow them to join the pavilion with her, and Yui would be more than happy to welcome them. Back in the control room, the governor is given a list of all the participating factions and their scores, and the Beacon Society is currently in first place. Liansu is curious what position the pavilion is in, so she asks about it, and she is told that the pavilion is in 7th place with 16 points, which is really impressive. However, there's also some bad news because when some instructors went to investigate the disappearance of the Tianyin faction, they discovered that they had all been killed. Liansu is shocked to hear this, but the governor is more so disappointed because he realizes that there is someone out there bending the rules to kill contestants without getting eliminated. If this goes on for much longer, more people could be put in danger, so he decides to begin the next stage of the tournament. Meanwhile, after Fawn met up with the girl from Liu's old faction, she started following him around all over the place, so Fawn asks her to just go back to her faction already and leave him alone. Jian begins pouting and says she's not here because of Fawn, she just hasn't gotten to play with Teddy in a long time, even though she also really wants to spend time with Fawn. Fawn can tell that Jian must care about Liu a lot, so he asks her what type of man she thinks he is, and after hearing him say this, Jian misunderstands the question, so she starts talking about all the dirty things she and Liu used to do in bed. This is really making Fawn really uncomfortable, so he backs away, but this confuses Jian since Liu would never act so shy around her. So Fawn makes up an excuse and tells her that he has been getting really bad headaches lately, so he lost a bunch of his memories and doesn't remember her well. Jian gets worried when she hears Fawn mention headaches because it sounds really similar to that weird disease that Liu used to have. This intrigues Fawn since it might explain the pain he has been feeling, so he grabs Jian by the shoulders and asks her to tell him all the details. However, touching her gets her flustered, so she goes red from embarrassment and punches him in the face. Jian later apologizes for hitting Fawn, but she says it's his fault because she never gave him permission to touch her, at least not until they are in private. Just then, Jian notices a pet sneaking up behind them, so Fawn turns around to prepare for an attack, but it turns out that it's only Firetails, so there's no need to be worried. Su then walks over and he's glad to see Fawn again, but then his master shows up at the top of a cliff and asks him if he has found any enemies yet. Stu tells her that there's no need to fight because these guys are his friends, but Fawn thinks it's a little weird that Su's entire faction is staying so close together since it is really inefficient. And while that may be true, Su tells him there are special circumstances that require them all to stay together, but he's not going to explain why. Just then, Su senses a terrifying presence approaching and he knows it's bad news, but it's too late to escape because Nising of the Beacon Society is already here. Su tells his master to wait a moment and let him do all the talking, so he then turns to Ni and politely asks if they can just leave. During this stage of the tournament, there's nothing to be gained by attacking other people because points can't be transferred and there are no orbs around here to acquire, so it would be pointless for them to fight right now. Su makes a good argument, so as much as Ni was looking forward to a good fight, he is reasonable enough to agree with Su. Su thanks him for understanding and says they are going to leave. But in a stroke bad luck, before they could leave, an announcement is made that the next phase of the tournament will now begin. And during this phase, points can be obtained by stealing the bracelets of other players, so Nei now has a reason to fight them. He jumps down from the cliff and lands right in front of Fawn and the others, but while Fawn is ready to fight, Jian and Su most certainly are not, so Su grabs his hand and starts dragging him away. Fawn asks why Su doesn't want to fight, so he explains that they would gain very little from fighting Nei, and he doesn't think they stand a chance against him anyway, so the best option is to run. Fawn asks if Nei is really that strong since he is sure that with Su's entire faction here, they should be able to defeat Nei. But about that, Su's faction isn't real. After Su and the others ran away, Nei turned his attention to Su's faction members, but as soon as he attacks, the two guys surrender. The old lady was about to surrender as well, but she got hit before she could finish saying the words, so her arm is broken. Nei can't believe all of them surrendered without even summoning a single pet, so he accuses them of mocking him. But the three plead with Nei to spare their lives because they aren't even real pet trainers. Meanwhile, Su is explaining to the others that he didn't have enough members to participate in the tournament, so he hired 3 people he found on the side of the road to pretend to be part of his faction. Fawn calls him an idiot because he just put innocent people in a lot of danger, and Su knows he messed up, but now all he can do is hope that the 3 of them can surrender in time before Nei does anything to them. At the same time, in the control room, Liansu asks the governor if he is trying to get the participants to kill each other, because a rule like this sounds like it will cause a lot of unnecessary deaths. However, the governor tells her that the point of this new rule isn't to make the participants fight each other. Back with Nei, he has taken the bracelets from all 3 of the fake faction members, but he is annoyed when he finds out that none of them had any points. The 3 explain that they gave all the orbs they found to Su, so he has all the points, and they beg Nei to just let him go because he has no use for them. However, Nei is so angry that he decides to kill the old lady for no reason at all. According to the governor, the point of this stage is to give the weaker factions a chance to surrender so only those with true determination will remain, but he failed to account for people like Nei who kill without remorse. And now, after dealing with Su's fake faction, he plans to target Su next. Now that the second phase has begun, all the pavilion members are gathering on a nearby cliff. Shai and Yui have already arrived, and a few minutes later, Fawn shows up as well, along with Su and Jian. Yui notices that the girl has been staring at Fawn for a while now, so she asks him who she is. Fawn introduces her as Jian Ruer from the Hongluan building, but before he can say anything more, she cuts him off and says she's his girlfriend. Fawn panics and tries to explain that it's a misunderstanding, but it's too late because the others already believe he and Jian are dating. They're very supportive. Just then, there's an announcement informing everyone that there are only 15 factions remaining in the tournament, A few moments later, the others see Gu approaching. Shai notices that she looks a little upset, so he asks her if she wasn't able to gather any orbs, but that's not the problem. Gu explains that she ran into Duwon and Jaime is apparently alive, but while that should be good news, Gu can't help but feel like something is wrong because Jaime looked weird. Her body was completely rotten, almost like a zombie, and as soon as Fawn hears this, it instantly reminds him of what happened to his whale in his past life. The faction Duwon joined must be involved in it somehow, so Fawn angrily demands to know where Duwon is. However, the others don't understand why he's so upset all of a sudden. Fawn gets a hold of himself and realizes he can't afford to lash out right now. He needs to focus on raising his rank first, so he can't let himself get riled up so easily. Since the second phase has already begun, they need to come up with a new strategy quickly. There are still 200 orbs scattered across the island right now, but it would be way too risky to split up and go collect them at this point. Stu suggests that they all team up to steal the bracelets of other players and collect their points since that's the goal of this phase. But while that may be a good plan, Shai is against it because he doesn't trust Sue and everyone knows it's against the rules to kill other trainers, so it'd be hard to get people to hand over their bracelets. However, Fawn has an idea and says that if they make some preparations in advance, then they'll be able to get the bracelets without having to kill anyone. A few minutes later, they drop a few orbs on the ground as bait, and within seconds, 2 members from the U2 sect show up. They are excited because they believe they have stumbled across some orbs that no one else has found, but they are still cautious, so one of them decides to send his pet out to retrieve the orbs. The wolf runs over to pick up all 3 orbs and brings them to its master, but when he tries to absorb the orbs, nothing happens. A moment later, the illusion fades and the man realizes that the 3 orbs were rocks all along, and to make matters worse, they have now been cornered by Fawn and the others. One of the men tries to call his wolf for help, but Thornback fires several spikes at it, and the wolf gets so scared that it starts running away. Unfortunately, it runs straight into Teddy's backside and gets hit with a stream of paralysis P. The other one tries to summon his pet to fight back, but before he could finish the hand sign, he gets grabbed by Vine and is slammed into the ground. The other guy tries to give up after seeing what they did to his friend, but it's too late because Vine also grabs him and slams him into the ground as well. Afterwards, Fawn walks up to them with Teddy in hand and sprays them both with some knockout P, and while they are unconscious, he removes the bracelets. One of them had 5 points while the other had 9, so Shai is really happy because the extra 9 points could help the pavilion get into the top 3. But Sue reminds them that he helped come up with the plan too, so he wants a share of the points. While Sue and Shai are busy arguing, Jian is standing off to the side since she isn't really interested in getting any points. But while everyone is distracted, she gets grabbed from behind by another one of those caterpillar things. The one responsible is the leader of the Baneful faction, and he has been watching them for a while now, waiting for the perfect chance to strike. And now that he has captured Jian, he orders everyone to give him their bracelets or else he will kill her on the spot. Yumi has first-hand experience with how that caterpillar's ability works, but there's no way for her to defeat it before it can kill Jian now. Su tries to bluff his way out of this and tells the leader that he chose the wrong person to take as a hostage because Jian isn't a part of the pavilion, and none of them care about what happens to her, but the leader isn't that gullible. He saw how friendly all of them were earlier, so even if she's not part of their faction, there's no way they'd be willing to let her die. Fawn steps up and says he is willing to hand over the 2 bracelets they just got if the leader releases Jian. There are 9 points in here, so it's not a bad deal for him, and Fawn even promises not to come after him if he agrees to the deal. Jian begins to blush because she didn't think Liu still cared about her this much, and the leader of the Baneful faction eventually agrees to the deal, so he tells Fawn to hand over the bracelets. Fawn does as he says and throws the bracelets over to the Baneful faction. Once they've gotten the points, he demands that they release Jian as promised. The leader agrees to release her, but first he says he's going to wait until he has gotten to a safe distance so Fawn and the others can't come after him. Fawn immediately refuses and demands that he release Jian right now, but the Baneful leader reminds them that Jian's life is still in his hands, so he can kill her if he wants to. Jian speaks up and apologizes for causing everyone so much trouble. She tells them that it's okay to let the leader take her, but Fawn doesn't think that's a good idea because the Baneful faction could betray them. However, Jian winks at Fawn and tells him to just trust her on this, so he reluctantly agrees to let the leader leave with Jian. But he swears that if the leader does anything to her, he's going to make sure that he and his entire sect burn to the ground. The leader tells the other 2 to stay here and make sure the pavilion members don't follow him, but even though Fawn agreed to this, he is still uneasy because he isn't sure what Jian is planning. Just then, an announcement is made informing everyone that Jian has been eliminated, and Fawn is enraged because he thinks they really did something to Jian. But a moment later, an announcement is made informing everyone that the Baneful faction's leader has been eliminated, and now Fawn has no idea what's going on. He tells the others to keep an eye on these two while he goes to check on Jian, but along the way, Jian finds him first and she seems perfectly fine. Earlier, while Jian and the leader were walking, she suddenly stopped and turned around. She thanks the leader because his kidnapping her made Fawn worry about her safety, but just because he has a bug on her head doesn't mean she's helpless. Jian begins summoning her pet, and before the leader can even react, he is mesmerized by what he sees. Jian's pet is called a foxy, and unfortunately, I do not know where to get one. The leader is trying to stay strong and resist Foxy's charms, but all it takes is one kiss and the leader is hypnotized by her beauty. As a result, he drops the caterpillar and remains frozen in place, so GM walks up beside him and says she surrenders. She never really had much interest in winning the competition anyway, so sees no reason to continue. And more importantly, according to the rules, now that she has surrendered, anyone who attacks her will automatically be disqualified, so while he is still hypnotized, she orders the leader to hit her on the head, causing him and his entire faction to be disqualified. Fawn had no idea that GM was capable of that, but he's glad that she's alright. In fact, GN is happier than ever because she knows Fawn was genuinely worried about her safety, and as thanks, she gives him the bracelet she got from the leader. Meanwhile, over in the control room, Liansu is puzzled when she sees that the entire Baneful faction has been eliminated. She asks the governor if they were all killed, but he points out the extra mark on their consoles and tells her that the faction was eliminated because their leader attacked someone who had surrendered. Afterwards, a few examiners are sent out to the island to retrieve those who got eliminated, but before Jian leaves, she apologizes to everyone for causing so much trouble. They'd all tell her that it's not a problem because thanks to her, they were able to gain so many points at once. Yui even invites Jian to come over to the pavilion for a celebration once the tournament is over. Jian says she's not sure Fawn would want her to come, but the others say there's no way Fawn would reject his girlfriend. It's too late for Fawn to tell everyone that Jian isn't his girlfriend, so he is forced to go along with it. Jian goes up to him and asks if he wants a goodbye kiss before she goes, but he frantically tells her that won't be necessary, so Jian gets on a griffin and leaves the island. As she is flying away, she thinks about how much Liu has changed since the last time she met him. It's almost like he's an entirely new person, but she still loves him, so she yells that she will stay by his side forever. Everyone snickers at Fawn and his lovely girlfriend, but he really doesn't want to talk about it, so he says they should start distributing the scores. Between the U2 faction and the Baneful faction they defeated, they have gotten 26 points, and that combined with the 20 points they already have should be enough to put them in the top 3. But Su violently reminds them that he participated as well, so he wants at least 5 points for all the work he did. Once they've agreed on the point distribution, they all share the points, and over in the control room, Liansu is amazed because the pavilion's score suddenly rose by a lot. They now have 41 points, which puts them in second place behind the Beacon faction, and Tanshu is really happy to see that the pavilion is doing well. He believes they must have taken out the U2 and Baneful factions to raise their score by so much, but to do so without any casualties is amazing. Liansu notices that one of the pavilion members has a lot more points than the others, so she asks about him, and Tanshu explains that it's a new member of the pavilion named Jun Yunzi. Since Liu Fengming is technically a wanted man, Fawn didn't want to use that name for the tournament, so he signed up as Jun Yunzi. Tanshu doesn't know much about Jun, but from what he has heard, he's a talented young man with great strength. After hearing all that, Liansu thinks Jun sounds like a great man, so she becomes excited and wants to meet him. She asks her brother if they can visit the pavilion after the competition is over, and since Tanshu is a fawn in the pavilion as well, he agrees, but he doesn't understand why she's so interested in visiting all of a sudden. Soon after, the current rankings are announced, placing the Beacon faction in first place with 54 points, the pavilion in second with 45 points, and the Rakshas sect in third with 43 points. Duan is shocked to hear that his new sect has fallen behind the pavilion, but he refuses to lose to them. Now that the second phase is over, it is announced that no one will be allowed to surrender from now on, and the final phase will begin soon. Back in the control room, Liansu notices that the island is sinking, so she asks the governor about it, and he explains to her that one of the rules of this tournament is that anyone who falls into the water will be eliminated. As such, participants will be forced to climb to the peak of the island to avoid getting submerged, which will cause them to clash more often. The entire island will be submerged within 2 hours, and the final rankings will be made based on the remaining teams and their scores. Back on the island, Fawn and the others are making a run for the hills to stay ahead of the rising water. But since surrendering is no longer allowed, the competition is a lot more dangerous than it was before, so he tells everyone to summon their pets and prepare for battle because they could be attacked at any moment. Just then, the group is attacked by a slash from Jaime, and Duan soon shows up along with his new faction. As soon as Fawn sees him, he demands to know what Duwon did to turn Jaime into a rotten monster, but Duwon tells Fawn he has no right to be asking questions when he's just a lowly newcomer. He then tells the others in his sect that he will be taking care of Gu and Shai, so they can handle the rest of them. And while Fawn is distracted, a tentacle emerges from the water and grabs his ankle. It then flings him into the air and begins pulling Fawn down into the water, so he's in big trouble. Since the bracelet is what senses whether he is underwater or not, he takes it off and throws it over to Sue, so now he has 3 minutes to make it back to land before he is disqualified. As Fawn is pulled underwater, he comes face to face with a high-level octopus pet. But while most people would be mortified because this means certain doom, Fawn is actually excited because he finally has a chance to use Nian. Sue can't believe Duwon's group was smart enough to prepare a water-type pet in advance, and everyone seems to know who Duwon is, so he asks Shai for an explanation. Shai informs Sue that Duwon is a former member of their pavilion. But if that's the case, then Sue doesn't understand why Duwon is so hostile towards them. Gu demands that Duwon release Fawn immediately, but Duwon tells her that someone like Fawn won't be enough to save the pavilion. He then tells everyone to hand over their bracelets if they want him to spare their lives, but Gu and Shai ignore him and just say he should release Fawn. Duwon becomes irritated by the fact that everyone seems to care about Fawn so much despite the fact that he's a newcomer, but Gu tells him he has no right to be upset when he was the first one to turn his back on the pavilion. She still thinks of him as a friend, but if he is going to stand in the way of the pavilion's progress, then Gu has had no choice but to defeat him. While Gu and Duwon are fighting, Yui stands off to the side because she doesn't want to get Panda involved in a battle like that. She is planning to hide and wait for an opportunity to assist her allies, but she is suddenly confronted by a member of the Rakshas faction. She tries to bluff her way out of a fight by warning the guy that Panda is extremely ruthless in combat, but he isn't scared because he also has a panda-type pet. While that is going on, Sue managed to slip away in all the chaos and is currently hiding behind a big rock. And since Fawn gave him his bracelet, if he doesn't make it out of the water in time, then Sue gets to keep it. With all those points, Sue could probably enter the top 4, so all he needs to do is lay low and avoid drawing attention until the tournament ends. However, before he could make his getaway, he is cornered by Wan, the leader of the faction he insulted during the registration process. Wangu wants to get revenge on Sue with his dinosaur pet, but while Wangu is busy bragging about how awesome his pet is, one of the Rakshas members notices him and summons his own dinosaur pet, and it is way too big for either Sue or Wang to handle, so Sue is forced to run for his life while Wang hangs onto him. Meanwhile, over in the water, Fawn is still being held by the giant octopus. Thanks to a little help from Nian, he's able to break free. Normally, facing an octopus in the water would be a death sentence, but Fawn has spent his entire past life training in water combat, so he's the one with the advantage here. The octopus attempts to grab Nian with its tentacles, but Nian is able to evade all its attacks, and within a matter of seconds, the octopus's tentacles are all tangled together so it can't move anymore. With the octopus immobilized, Fawn orders Nian to swallow it whole, so Nian begins generating a whirlpool to pull it in. Up on the surface, the octopus's master realizes something is wrong, but before he can react, the water begins to swirl violently, and a moment later, Nian has completely devoured his pet. Fawn then jumps out of the water and thanks the man for giving Nian such a tasty meal, but he needs to get back to his friends, so he just tosses the man into the water to eliminate him. Gu and Shai are glad to see that Fawn is alright, but Duwon is pissed because he is still jealous of him. Fawn makes his way back onto the main island and heads straight for Sue to get his bracelet back. Sue is shocked to see that Fawn actually made it out of the water alive, but he's really happy to see him because he needs help with the T-Rex. He begins sucking up to Fawn and tells him a wildly exaggerated story about how he protected Fawn's bracelet, but Fawn doesn't want to hear all that. He just wants to get his bracelet back before the 3-minute elimination timer is up. Sue understands, so he throws the bracelet over to Fawn, but to his dismay, as soon as Fawn gets the bracelet, he just walks away, leaving Sue to fend for himself. And that means more running for his life. Fawn eventually finds Yui in the middle of her fight, so he goes up to her and asks if she can handle things here by herself. Yui tells him her opponent isn't that tough, so she should be able to defeat him with the techniques that Fawn taught her. But the problem is that Panda refuses to listen to her long enough to actually use the techniques. All he cares about right now is punching Brown Panda, but the Brown Panda has more strength, so Panda gets blown back into a rock. Panda eventually recovers, but he still isn't listening to any of Yui's instructions, so Fawn steps in for a little bit and restrains the Brown Panda. Panda looks at Fawn in annoyance, but Fawn assures him that he doesn't intend to interfere in his fight too much. But he does need a little help, so he asked Panda to use his color powers to paint Nian a little. Meanwhile, Shai and View are having some trouble dealing with Duwon because Jaime is simply too strong. However, before Duwon could finish them off, Fawn steps in to help. He summons Nyan to fight Duan, but since catfishes are still outlawed, Fawn asked Panda to paint Nyan, so now he looks totally different. Duan has never seen anything like it before, so he asks Fawn what kind of pet that is, and Fawn says it's a roc, basically a species of whale that evolved into a bird. Duan seems convinced, so he accuses Fawn of trying to imitate Master Fawn with his whale-type pet. He thinks Fawn is just a fame-seeking leech who is using the others at the pavilion for personal gain. A bit hypocritical, coming from the guy who turned his back on his friends a month ago, but Duan is already too far gone for common sense to work, so he swears that he will get rid of Fawn for the sake of the other. Fawn says he can handle Duan on his own, so he asks Shai to go help Sue with the T-Rex in the meantime. Over on Sue's end, he is still running for his life in the forest, and he is yelling at Wangu to let go of him so he can run faster, but Wangu is too scared. Just then, Shai and Thornback arrive, and Sue couldn't be happier to see them. But before helping Sue, Shai points to one of the treetops and tells Thornback to fire at it. Thornback launches several spikes at those trees, but before any of them could land, the T-Rex runs in to block the spikes with its face. It turns out that the T-Rex's master has been hiding in the trees this whole time just so he could mess with us. But he is impressed that Shai managed to spot him after such a short time. He invites Shai to join the Rakshas faction because he has talent, but Shai is so busy talking to Sue that he didn't even hear the man's offer. For a moment, Wanwu thinks he is safe because the dinosaur hasn't attacked him in a while. But then it slams its head into the ground and Wanwu has had enough, so he throws his bracelet at Shai and says he quits. Shai is utterly shocked since he wasn't expecting Wanwu to quit so easily, but she is more interested in how they are going to split Wan's points. The T-Rex then tries to take Shai and Sue out with its tail, but the two of them manage to evade in time. In the process, Shai drops the bracelet, but now's not the time to be worrying about things like that because they need to defeat the T-Rex immediately. However, he's not sure how to do that since the thorns he fired at it earlier weren't effective at all. Just then, Sue launches several fire blasts at the dragon, but while it manages to get the T-Rex's attention, the attacks do no damage. She asks him to try using ice tails to attack it, but Sue says he already tried that and it wasn't effective either because the T-Rex is too tough. It is practically a zombie, so it doesn't feel pain and it won't stop until its master is satisfied. However, Shai has a plan to take it down, so he asks for a little help and Sue seems to understand what Shai is trying to do. He summons both fire and ice tails and has them join forces to create a giant elemental swirl in the air. And then Shai instructs Thornback to fire spikes through the swirl, imbuing the spikes with both fire and ice energy. Once those spikes hit the T-Rex, they pierce through its skin and manage to set its body on fire. However, the T-Rex's master tells them they shouldn't be so confident because this T-Rex has a special move that it hasn't used yet. In the next moment, the T-Rex lets out a terrifying roar, and the mere sound of it causes all the pets to cower in fear and lose the will to fight. Sue doesn't understand what just happened, so the man explains that the T-Rex just used menacing roar, and the technique activates the primal fear instinct in all pets that are weaker than it, making them unable to fight back. However, that move only works on pets, so any humans within range will be unaffected, and it just so happens that Nishin was nearby, so he comes out of nowhere and knocks the T-Rex down with his fist. The T-Rex's master can't believe Nishin was able to defeat a T-Rex barehanded, and Sue was amazed by how powerful Nishin is, so he asks Shai if Nishin is his friend. Shai wouldn't exactly call Nishin his friend since the last time they fought was a little tense, but he did save them, so Shai thanks Nishin for coming to their rescue. Nishin pretends that he didn't come here to save Shai in the first place, but since he's here, he might as well take this bracelet he found on the floor as a reward. Elsewhere, Yui and Panda are still in the middle of their fight, and this is the 5th time that Panda has been knocked out, but he still refuses to listen to Yui and gets back up to fight on his own. The brown panda's master admits that Panda is the toughest opponent that he has faced so far, but as things are now, Panda won't last much longer, so it'd be smart for Yui to give up before he gets seriously hurt. Panda tries attacking Brown Panda again, but just like before, all of his wild attacks are easily dodged and Brown Panda punches Panda into a wall again. The Brown Panda is zombified so it can ignore pain and can keep fighting indefinitely, so there's no way Panda can win with brute force. But when Yui tries to stop him, he just shrugs her off and keeps going. Yui recalls what Fawn told her earlier about Panda being very stubborn, so she can't just let him do what he wants. Only the strong can conquer the strong, so she needs to be firm with her orders and smack some sense into him if needed. Yui puts her hand on Panda's shoulders and tells him they've been through a lot together, so he can trust her to make good decisions as long as he promises to listen to her instructions. However, Panda ignores her, so she grabs him again and threatens to whoop him if he doesn't start behaving himself. Panda is terrified because he remembers how Yui nearly crushed that caterpillar guy's skull with her thighs, and he doesn't want to find out what that feels like, so he promises that he will listen to her from now on. Now that that's been settled, Yui tells Panda that the brown panda has more strength than him, so he needs to change his tactics if he wants to win. And luckily, she has already come up with a perfect plan. The brown panda's master begins mocking them and says they should just give up already, but Yui and Panda are locked in. Brown tries to punch Panda again, but this time Panda used a clone as a distraction and appears behind him. Once Panda makes it past Brown, he and Yui perform the dazzling flash technique to blind Brown's master. By the time he regains his vision, the first thing he sees is Brown standing victorious over Panda, so he thinks he has won. But in the next moment, Brown charges at the master and knocks him out with one punch. It is then revealed that Panda had disguised himself as Brown to trick Brown's master into lowering his guard. And now that the master has been taken out, Brown is down as well. Yui is really happy because everything went according to plan, so now they can just take his bracelet and in 3 minutes he will automatically be eliminated and she will be victorious. Meanwhile, on the beach, Fawn is alone with Duan, and they are about to face off against each other. When Duan was still in the process of training Jaime, he went to Master Fawn and asked him to have a little practice match with him so he could learn how to master it. Duan was so happy when Master Fawn agreed to spar with him, but now, even though Master Fawn is supposed to be dead, for some reason he is getting the same feeling. Fawn tells Gu to let him handle this on his own, so she flies into the air, but before she leaves, she asks Fawn to give Duan a chance to explain himself once this is all over. Duan orders Jaime to charge at Fawn, but Fawn uses his water bag skill to stop Jaime in her tracks and slam her to the ground. Duan is shocked when he sees this because this is the exact same skill that Master Fawn used against him when they were fighting years ago. Jaime gets back up and begins slashing at Fawn, but he is using a water bubble to shield himself from the attacks. This isn't the first time Fawn has seen this attack, so he knows how to deal with it and forms a water ring around Jaime before trapping her in a whirling pillar of water. Duan is stunned because the only one who has ever pulled off a skill like this was Master Fawn, and it was really hard to deal with. Since there is nothing to stand on inside the whirlpool, Jaime's speed became useless. But when Master Fawn tried slamming her into a wall with the force of the water, Jaime was able to break out of the water at the last second to avoid getting hit. Duan believes it shouldn't be a problem since Jaime has countered this skill before, but this time she isn't able to break out in time, so Fawn slams her into a rock with full force. The reason Jaime was able to free herself from the trap in the past was because she used her instincts to predict the flow of the water and cut her way out. But since Jaime is a zombie Neo, she no longer has a mind of her own, which is why she couldn't react. Now that Jaime has been defeated, Fawn tells Duan that he should let Jaime rest, because it's not right to be controlling a dead body like this. However, Duan refuses to accept that Jaime is really gone, and he doesn't want to listen to another word from Fawn's mouth. Duan uses his skill to launch one final attack on Fawn, but his attack misses, and by the time he realizes what's going on, Fawn is already on top of him and slams Duan's head into the ground. And just before Duan loses consciousness, he is amazed by how much the newcomer reminds him of Master Fawn. Duan had actually tried to return to the pavilion after he initially quit because he didn't want to give up on restoring the pavilion, but when he got to the gate, all he could see was Fawn and the others happily working towards rejuvenating their faction without him. Duan eventually regains consciousness, and he begins struggling to get up, but Fawn has asked Vine to keep him restrained. Duan tells them to just kill him already because he would rather die than be disgraced, but Gu assures him that they don't have any ill intent towards him. Fawn says he has something serious he wants to talk about, and Duan has no choice but to listen, so Fawn asks him if he had anything to do with the death of the former master of the pavilion. Duan is outraged that Fawn would dare accuse him of doing something like that, and Gu doesn't think it's possible for Duan to have done such a thing because he respected their master more than anyone in the world. She asks Fawn why he would suspect Duan, but Fawn tells her he has a lot of reasons to be suspicious. The Rakshas faction that Duan joined is able to make zombie pets, and Fawn was killed because someone zombified his whale during the match last year. It can't be a mere coincidence, so Fawn asks Duan one last time if he had anything to do with the assassination. Duan breaks down in hysterical laughter because he realizes he really does look suspicious, but he denies having anything to do with the death of his master. He just went to the Rakshas faction because they said they could help. Gu asks him to explain everything to them. So Duan talks about how after Jaime was killed, he wandered the streets for days looking for someone who could bring her back to life. Most people looked at him like a madman since resurrecting the dead is impossible. Duan continued searching for help day and night until Jaime's body began to rot. Eventually, he learned of some rumors about the Rakshas faction, so he went to them to see if they could help. Duan had heard that the Rakshas faction had a special skill that could bring dead pets back to life, and after meeting with the Rakshas master, he told Duan that he could indeed bring his pet back to life, but in exchange, he demanded that Duan join the Rakshas faction. Duan was so desperate to save Jaime that he immediately agreed to the terms, and although he didn't get to see how they did it, the Rakshas members eventually returned with Jaime, and she had indeed come back to life. The rumors say that the Rakshas faction has a magic pill that allows them to reanimate the dead, so Gu wonders if they might have had something to do with their master's death, but Duan doesn't think that's the case since the Rakshas faction said they can only turn dead pets into zombies. However, that doesn't change the fact that their zombie pets are similar to what happened to Master Fawn's whale. Fawn releases Duan since he no longer has any reason to suspect him, and he apologizes for acting so harshly. He extends his hand and asks if Duan would like to work together so they can investigate the Rakshas faction together after the tournament is over, and seeing such a display of kindness reminds Duan of the day he first met Master Fawn. He is about to take Fawn's hand, but at the last second, he hesitates because he doesn't think he deserves to be accepted back into the pavilion. Just then, a woman named Mizzy appears behind them, and she's from the Beacon faction, so she's here looking for a fight. She throws 2 explosive pods at the ground, so everyone is forced to jump out of the way, and Gu is forced to push Duan out to safety because he is still a bit dazed. Once she regains her bearings, Gu tells Duan that he can wait here and rest since he is still injured, but she needs to go help Fawn in the fight, so she runs off. Duan feels completely helpless, and he begins thinking that the pavilion no longer needs someone like him, so there's no point in him joining them. As a result of his insecurities, Duan begins to hallucinate and suddenly sees an illusion of Gu holding his hand. She happily leads him into the pavilion, or at least what Duan remembers the pavilion as, and even though he knows it's not real, once he sees all his old friends and Master Fawn happily working together, he can't help but break down in tears. He then sees an illusion of what Hemi once was, and this makes it painfully clear to him that the Jaime he has now isn't the same pet he once loved. Meanwhile, Fawn is firing several water blasts at Mizzy to try and bring her down, but it's not easy since her flight pattern is hard to predict. Eventually, Fawn manages to sneak up on her and orders Nyan to swallow Mizzy, but unfortunately, Mizzy managed to stab Nyan's mouth to escape and proceeds to swing him around by his antenna before slamming him to the ground. That practically takes Fawn out of the fight, so Gu steps up to confront Mizzy by using Scent Skipper to fly into the sky. Mizzy tries to knock Gu down using some of her tendrils, but Gu's flying skills are advanced enough that she is able to dodge most of the tendrils and manages to get behind Mizzy. And once she's in Mizzy's blind spot, Gu creates a pink slime ball and throws it at her. Mizzy was unable to react in time, so she gets covered in the sticky pink goo, and with it all over her, she can't move her wings anymore to stay in the air, so she falls into the forest. However, she refuses to go down alone, so just before she drops out of the sky, Mizzy uses one of the tendrils to grab Gu by the ankles and drags her down too. Duan hears Gu screaming and wants to go help, but that would mean leaving his perfect imaginary world behind, so he is starting to hesitate. Meanwhile, Gu and Mizzy have crash-landed in the forest, and Gu's Scent Skipper was badly injured during the fall, so she won't be able to fight anymore. Gu stores her pet away so she doesn't get hurt anymore, but Mizzy seems like she's perfectly fine and she's really pissed. She rips the pink goo off her body and uses her tendrils to spit some flammable body fluid at Gu as revenge. Mizzy then strikes her tail against a rock to create a spark and sets the forest on fire while creating a ring of flames around Gu. She plans to leave Gu here so she can burn to death, and with her pet out of commission, it looks like there really is no way for Gu to escape. Trees begin to burn and crumble all around Gu, and Duan can hear all the chaos going on nearby, so his imaginary world begins to go down in flames as reality creeps back in on him. He tries to convince himself that everything here is real, but deep down he knows that no matter how hard he tries, things can never go back to the way they were before. A lot of his old friends have already left the pavilion for good. Master Fawn has been dead for over a year now, and even his beloved pet, Jaime, has died and become nothing more than an animated corpse. He realizes he can't reclaim the things that he has already lost, but there are still people who care about him a lot, like Gu, but if he doesn't do something soon, then the real Gu is probably going to die a painful death, and that's something he can't let happen. Duan calls out to Jaime and asks her to fight with him one last time so they can save Gu before he finally puts her to rest. A few moments later, Jaime cuts through the flames to make a path to Gu, so Duan runs in to get to her. Gu is relieved to see Duan, but she has inhaled a lot of smoke, so it's hard for her to keep standing and she nearly collapses. Duan catches her and begins carrying Gu out of the flames, but when she looks back, she realizes that Hemi is still standing in the middle of the fire. She begs Duan to tell Jaime to get out of there before she gets burnt to ash, but Duan tells her it's better for things to end like this. As much as Duan doesn't want to admit, Fawn had a point when he said turning Jaime into a zombie wasn't the right thing to do. As he continues to walk away, Duan recalls all the fond memories he had with Jaime before she died, and he knows he has to come to terms with her death. He can't keep putting Jaime through such torture for his own selfish reasons, so he hopes she can finally find peace in the afterlife. Meanwhile, on the other side of the island, the members of the Beacon sect have just confronted the remaining members of the pavilion, and it looks like they are aiming for a full squad wipe here. At the same time, Fawn is still trying to stop Nai, but with her in the air, there isn't much he can do, so he asks Vine and the others to bring her down as soon as they can. Back with the others, Panda tries to rush in to throw hands with the one who has an armed teeth pet, but that turned out to be a bad idea because those teeth are very versatile, and before Panda has time to react, he has already been stabbed several times. Yui gets worried when she sees Panda injured, so she runs over to check on him. But she fails to consider that Shang doesn't care about the tournament's no-killing rules, so as soon as she gets close, he uses his armed teeth to bite her torso in half. All the other pet trainers are locked in combat, and while that's going on, Nishin and his father are watching from the top of the hill. Nishin's father realizes the Beacon Master is way too strong, so he suggests that he and Nishin should get out of here as soon as possible. But Nishin says he was actually hoping to fight the Beacon Master because he looks strong. His father thumps him on the head and reminds Nishin that he has already used up all the energy he saved for this tournament. 3 months ago, Nishin was sitting in his room looking at a dirty magazine when his father suddenly came in with some great news. There's going to be a tournament soon, and the winning sect will be promoted to D rank. Nishin thinks that sounds great, so he asks his dad how many members their sect will have. But it's basically just Nishin, his dad, his mom, and his sister. Anyway, Nishin's dad was thinking about making him the master of their sect since he is definitely the strongest of them, but even with Scale being in the mature stage, Nishin's father worries that it won't be enough to defeat all the high-level trainers that will be in the tournament, so he suggests that they should use Scale's special ability to give them an advantage. Scale has a special ability to store energy, so if Nishin trains for a long time, he can store the energy from his training inside Scale and use it later. Nishin diligently trained for months to raise the energy meter, but 1 week before the tournament was set to begin, when his father came to bring Nishin his new sect uniform, he discovered that Nishin had wasted all the energy to give himself the Giga Chad physique, so it was back to training after that. As a result, Nishin has way less energy than expected by the start of the tournament, so it's best if they just stay hidden for now. Nishin still thinks he should be able to handle the Beacon Master since Scale is an Emperor-class pet, but his father reminds him that even an Emperor that is only in the mature stage is no match for a high-level pet, even if it's not special. Nishin understands that, so he tells his father he is willing to use the forbidden technique to make up for the difference in power, but his father calls him crazy because that would be unbelievably reckless. The reason they came here in the first place is so their sect can be promoted to D class, and since there are only a few factions remaining, if they just stay out of sight for a while, it will make it into the top 5. Nishin is aware of how dangerous it is, and he doesn't want to disappoint his dad, but he also doesn't want to watch Shai get killed in battle. As soon as Nishin says this, his father understands that he is only willing to take such a risk because he wants to help a friend, so he tells him he is free to do whatever he believes is best. The master of the Beacon sect is about to land a finishing blow on Shai, but at the last second, Scale appears behind him, which distracts him for a moment. Nishin then shows up next to Shai, saying he couldn't just leave him to die here, and Shai is really happy to see Nishin right now. Up in the sky, Scale grabs the master of the Beacon sect and begins dragging him higher into the air, and Beacon looks like he is starting to panic because Scale fires a blast that absolutely decimates the mountain range. However, he soon realizes that Scale is only in the mature stage, so he actually stands a chance against it. He uses his spine pet to stab through Scale's body, severely injuring him and causing Scale to fall out of the sky. Nishin gets worried and runs over to check on Scale, but Scale is in pretty bad shape, so he won't be able to fight anymore. In that final week of training, Nishin managed to save up 25 points of energy, but after all the fighting he has already done, that energy is gone. However, that doesn't mean he isn't able to fight anymore, so he turns to Scale and asks to be lent 10 points of power. Scale's energy begins turning purple and power flows into Nishin's body, but he is now in power debt, so there will be consequences later. Nishin's dad watches on from a distance, and he still doesn't like that Nishin is using that forbidden skill, but it was Nishin's choice to make, so if his dad wants to respect his decision. Now that he has the power to fight, Nishin charges straight at the Beacon Master, and when the Master tries stabbing him with his tail, he jumps on top and runs up to deliver a heavy punch straight to the face. The Master is starting to get angry, so he unleashes a barrage of spine strikes, which Nishin is forced to block. He's alright for now, but if things continue like this, then he is going to run out of energy. The Master eventually breaks through Nishin's defenses and is preparing to finish him off, so Nishin is forced to borrow another 10 points of energy and go further into debt to continue fighting. He then punches the master away, sending him flying into a pile of rocks, but that wasn't enough to make him stay down. The Beacon Master gets back up, and he is really angry now. So he jumps into the air, and once he is over Nishin, he activates his rib cage prison ability to pin him to the ground. Shai can tell that Nishin is in trouble, so he asks Thornback to go help him. But unfortunately, Thornback can't really do much here, so it just gets swatted away. After seeing his friend's pet get hurt, Nishin is no longer concerned about minimizing his debt, so he suddenly asks to borrow 30 points of power at once. Nishin's father sees what he is doing and tries to warn him to stop because he is going to have to pay interest on that power loan, but Nishin doesn't care because the only thing that matters right now is defeating the Beacon Master. A sudden surge of power fills Nishin's body, so he is able to break free from the bone prison and proceed to give the Beacon Master the worst beatdown of his life before punching him so hard that the sky changes color. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Shang is busy searching for his targets because Panda took Yui and went to hide behind a rock. She managed to survive getting bitten across the torso, but she was severely injured, so she won't last much longer like this. Eventually, Shang figures out where they must be hiding, so he attacks them again with his armed teeth, and Panda is forced to take the hit for Yui's sake. With Panda severely injured now, Shang prepares to finish him off, so he raises his arm while Yui watches on in horror. Her heart is pounding faster than it ever has before, and she thinks back to a moment when Master Fawn told her that she had the potential to become a great pet trainer, so she should never give up. Yui takes those words to heart, so with all the energy and willpower she can muster, she takes control of Panda and helps him dodge the armed teeth to lure Shang in. And once he is close enough, Panda delivers a face-shattering punch, knocking Shang out cold. They manage to win in the end, but Yui is still badly injured, so she passes out and Panda carries her away to go look for help. But it looks like Shang's armed teeth are still able to move, so they may end up causing trouble later. On the other side of the battlefield, Nishin has just collected the bracelet of the Spine Spike user, and he is pretty proud of himself for defeating such a strong opponent. Just then, Shai and Nishin's dad run up because they've been looking all over for him. At first, Nishin thinks Shai is here to try and take his bracelet, but Shai says he would never do that. He's just here to show his gratitude for what Nishin did for him. But as soon as Nishin remembers what he did, he starts crying. Shai doesn't understand why Nishin is so upset because all he said was thank you. But that's not why he's crying. Nishin just remembered that he borrowed 50 points of power to win his battle, and that means he's going to have to train like crazy for months to pay it all back. Switching back over to Fawn now, he is still fighting against Mizi, and it is difficult to land hits on her while she's in the air, but he has already come up with a strategy to counter that. He has Vine launch him into the air and then grab Mizi to keep her in the same spot for a while, and once he gets the chance, he summons his flaming steel ball pet and has it turn into a sword. He then uses that sword to cut Mizi down, and now that she's been taken care of, Fawn runs over to the forest to check on Gu. He finds Gu just as she is being carried out of the forest by Duan, and she happily tells Fawn that Duan has had a change of heart. Duan throws his bracelet at Fawn and says he is quitting the tournament, so Gu asks him if this means he's going to rejoin the pavilion. However, Duan says he's actually going to stay in the Rakshas sect. He thought about what Fawn said earlier, and the Rakshas faction's reanimation technique really is similar to the incident that killed Master Fawn, so he plans to stay in the Rakshas sect so he can look for clues related to the incident. This entire time, the true mastermind of the E sect has been watching things unfold, and he is frustrated by how useless the others were even though he lent them his precious parasite pets. But it doesn't matter anymore because he is going to finish this on his own. He recalls all of his parasite pets and fuses with them to raise his power, and everyone left on the island can feel the terrifying energy coming from his body. Clyde plans to end this stupid competition as soon as possible, so he channels his energy into his eye and fires a laser beam. The beam doesn't hit anyone, so Nishin assumes he missed, but in reality, Kwai's target was the giant turtle below the island. Hitting the turtle like that has made it mad, so it has started descending into the water a lot quicker. As a result, the water begins to rise suddenly, and a lot of the contestants are submerged before they have a chance to react. Over in the control room, the governor realizes that the East Sect must be up to no good again, so he orders all the instructors to head to the island and save all the participants who are currently drowning. Back on the island, Fawn jumps into the water to save Gu from drowning, but after she makes it back to the surface, he is nowhere to be seen. Before long, the examiners arrive on the scene and begin rescuing all the people who fell into the water. They then confront Kuai and ask him why he would do something like this, but Kuai says he did nothing wrong. He tells them there's nothing in the rules about attacking the turtle to sink the island, so he can't be disqualified for what he did. Besides, with everyone else in the water, they have all been eliminated, so Kuai tells them to hurry up and announce him as the winner. However, to everyone's shock, the elimination announcer tells everyone that there are still two people who haven't been eliminated. One is Kwai, and the other is Fawn, who managed to get back on land without his bracelet getting wet, so the final showdown of the tournament is about to begin. Liansu is excited to see that someone from the pavilion managed to survive, but objectively speaking, she doesn't understand why he would risk his life by continuing to fight since he is already guaranteed second place. But we all know Fawn would never settle for the easy way out. After he had Nyan devour the octopus from earlier, he entered the peak of soul building stage, so Fawn was able to upgrade him to the concert stage earlier than expected. All he needs to do is feed Nyan one of the upgrade materials, but it's a bit of a gamble to do it out here, since if picks the wrong material, then Nyan won't be able to move to the next stage for half a year, but Fawn is confident that he knows what he's doing. After the upgrade is complete, Fawn heads out into the open to confront Kwai, but Kwai is honestly offended that nobody from the pavilion thinks he can win. Fawn assures Kwai that he won't be disappointed with his performance, and as proof of his abilities, he summons Nyan, who is now in the concert stage and has evolved into a full whale. Kwai fires several explosive bullets at Fawn, but Fawn creates a water ball and uses it to catch the bullets before having Nyan eat and fire them right back at Kwai. Kwai is forced to fly into the air to dodge, and when he comes back down, he attempts to slash Fawn with his bone arm, and afterwards, he starts firing even more shots at him. Fawn hops on Nyan and rides off to evade all the attacks, and once he has a clear line of sight, he sends Nyan out to body check Kwai. Fawn thinks things are going pretty well for him right now, but he celebrated a little too early because Kwai soon wakes up and takes control of his bike puppets to fire several lasers at Nyan. Nyan manages to dodge the first set of lasers, but in that moment, Kwai managed to sneak up behind him and fires a blast that catches both Fawn and Nyan by surprise. They are both launched several meters out, and since Nyan just entered the concert stage, Fawn will feel every bit of pain that his pet feels, so Kwai's plan is to make Fawn give up by torturing him in battle. However, Fawn didn't come into this fight without a plan, so once he finally regains his bearings, he tells Nyan it's time for them to fuse. Nyan swallows Fawn, and the two of them are now connected, so their reaction speed and power is far greater than what it used to be. Kwai realizes this will be bad for him, so he orders his puppets to move into position and fire more lasers at Nyan, but Nyan creates a massive wave and washes them all away. Kwai tries flying away, but Nyan catches up to him and hits him with a jet of water, so he retaliates by sending more of his puppets after Nyan. Once they get back to land, Nyan spits Fawn out, and Fawn summons Vine to take control of one of the puppets and uses it as an engine so they can catch up to Kwai. And once they are close enough, Nyan swallows Fawn again before trying to devour Kwai. Kwai panics and fires some nasty yellow liquid at Nyan, and Fawn doesn't want that stuff anywhere near him, so Nyan cancels the suction and spins to deflect whatever that liquid was. Fawn then uses the spin momentum to hand deliver a dozen slaps straight to Kwai's face, and the force was so high that it sent Kwai crashing straight into the water. When Kwai emerges from the water, he begins firing his lasers again, but Nyan keeps dodging them all with ease. He doesn't understand how a whale could possibly be so agile, but since Fawn and Nyan are connected right now, he has greater control over Nyan movements, and while he is inside Nyan's storage space, time flows 8 times slower for him, so dodging lasers like this is child's play. However, when Kwai increases the volume of the lasers, Nyan eventually gets hit, so Fawn is forced to go out on his own. He uses Teddy as a piss rocket, and once he makes it close enough to Kwai, he summons his iron ball and turns it into a gauntlet just before punching Kwai so hard that he is sent back down to the island and knocked out in an instant. When Liamsu and Tiansu see that the pavilion has won the battle, they are both overjoyed, and Liamsu is particularly interested in meeting this mysterious member of the pavilion because he seems very capable. Back on the island, Fawn is relieved that he managed to come out on top in that fight, so he sits down and looks out onto the sunset to celebrate his victory. But there's still a lot of runtime left in the episode, so we aren't done yet. With Kwai knocked out, the parasitic pets that he was using are able to overpower him, so within a matter of moments, they all devour and take over Kwai's body, so now Fawn has to fight again. He tries using Nyan to launch a couple water attack at the parasite, but with the parasite in its true form and Fawn in his current weakened state, he isn't strong enough to handle it, so Nyan gets shot in one of his fin. Fawn cancels the summoning so Nyan won't get hurt anymore, but he still needs to come up with a plan to deal with the parasite. However, everything he has tried so far has ended in terrible failure. The parasite begins prying Fawn's eyes open so it can take control, devour his soul. But as soon as it touches the barrier of Fawn's soul, something awakens inside him, and all of a sudden, a red arm emerges from Fan's soul to punch the parasite away. It seems pretty pissed that something would dare to disturb its peaceful slumber, and Fawn has no idea what it is, but as long as it helps him defeat the parasite, he couldn't care less. Unfortunately, the mysterious entity has no intention of helping Fawn out, so it simply withdraws and starts mumbling about how hungry he is. The parasite pins Fawn to the ground, and it looks like it's about to devour him. But at the last second, Chansu shows up on the island and saves Fawn by dragging the parasite off him with his pet. Fawn is still struggling with the entity inside him, but Chansu assumes he was just injured by the parasite, so he asks Liansu to come check on him. As soon as Fawn hears Liansu's name, he realizes he's in for a lot of trouble because she probably still hates him because of whatever Liu did to her. She hasn't seen Fawn's face yet, so she doesn't realize who he is, and she is really eager to talk to him. But Fawn doesn't have time for that because he's fighting his inner demon. Inside of Fawn's soul is confronted by the entity, and the entity doesn't seem to know that Fawn has taken over Liu's body, so it keeps addressing him as Liu. It is surprised that Liu is still alive since it was sure it had killed him for refusing to agree to its terms, but now that it is awake again, it says it's hungry, so it begins fighting for control over Fawn's body. Back in the real world, Fawn is starting to lose control of his body and can tell that something is wrong. But when she goes to check on him, she's horrified to realize that the mysterious member of the pavilion she was crushing on is the same guy from before. She tries calling her brother over to help, but he's too busy dealing with the parasite to listen to her, so she's on her own. She tries using her new snake pet to attack Fawn, but it's literally still a baby, so it doesn't do much. Fawn then pounces on her, and the entity inside him begins sucking the energy out of Liansu's mouth. After a few minutes of fighting, Chansu is easily able to freeze the parasite and defeat it, so he turns back to check on the others, but to his utter shock, he finds Fawn on top of Liansu in a very compromising position. It takes him a moment to process what's happening, but once he finally understands, he goes red in the face and immediately kicks Fawn into the water. That kick snapped him out of it, so while Fawn is in the water, he finally regains his senses. He has a lot to think about since the entity mentioned how it killed Liu, and it may have something to do with the disease that this body supposedly has. More importantly, Fawn remembers that the entity pushed Liansu to the ground while it was in control of Fawn's body, and doing something like that in front of Chiansu is bound to cause problems. A moment later, Fawn is pulled out of the water by Chiansu's snake, and as expected, Chiansu is absolutely furious. So while the pavilion is announced as the winners of the tournament, Fawn is tied up and led away as a prisoner. He had thought things would finally go well for him since he had raised Nyan to the concert stage, but now it just so happened that Liu had a demon in him, and he is being held prisoner because of its actions now. Liansu seems pleased that she has finally caught Fawn, but Chiansu is more so just disappointed because he had genuine hope that the pavilion would return to its former glory thanks to the talented new guy, but he disappointingly turned out to be a lecher. He says that if Master Fawn were still alive, he would never approve of such a person, but Fawn doesn't recall having any sort of relationship with Tiansu, so he asks why Tiansu speaks like he knew Master Fawn well. Tiansu admits that he only met him briefly during a tournament, and much like the other high-ranking trainers, Tiansu looked down on Fawn for coming from a plain sect. However, Fawn remained calm under pressure and quickly built up so much strength that everyone was forced to acknowledge him. That kind of accomplishment is why Tiansu holds Master Fawn in such high regard, but he doesn't believe someone like him could ever pull off the same feat. Right now, the pavilion has become a D-class sect again, so they are forced to start from the bottom, and Fawn has honestly been having doubts about whether he can truly rise to the top of the rankings. He's worried that things will just end up like they did last time, and since fate doesn't want him to succeed, then he might as well just give up. However, he then remembers that he has friends supporting him, people who rely on him, and people who want to see the pavilion succeed just as much as he does, so he can't let himself give up, not until he has accomplished his goal, found his murderer, and cleared the name of all catfish pets. Speaking of which, Tiansu demands that Fawn return the catfish to him immediately, but Fawn really doesn't want to do that. If Tiansu finds out that Fawn has trained Nyan all the way up to the concert stage, he's definitely going to force him to return it, so Fawn makes up an excuse and lies, saying that he ate the catfish. Tiansu doesn't believe him, but there's no way for him to prove that Fawn is lying, so he lets it go for now, and he tells Liansu to bring Fawn to his chambers because tonight he is going to punish him thoroughly, and Fawn really doesn't like the sound of that. Meanwhile, All the others at the pavilion have heard of Fawn's situation, and Shai is holding a memorial for him, but Ku smacks him on the head and reminds him that Fawn isn't dead yet. It's just being held at the Bai family mansion. So he will go there in the morning to plead for Fan's release. After all, it's thanks to him that the pavilion made it this far. And even though the Fawn is currently a prisoner again, he is determined to continue fighting until the pavilion is at the top. The end.